Hey, that was good timing. Also, what is wrong with my lighting? All right. Well, as you guys are used to already, my name is nerdSlayer. I am the host of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. This is episode 39, and we're doing it live, okay? Okay. That light started falling down, okay? If you guys want to know why. Let me fix this light. Look at this thing. Like, falling onto me. Much better. Up. It almost fell on me again. For some reason, the lights in my study or office, if you will, have it out for me. As do the panels that keep falling down behind me. Anyway, how's everybody doing on this 24th of June? It's obviously Monday. It's the 6 Pixels Under podcast, and it wouldn't be a normal podcast if we didn't start in a not so normal way. On this week's podcast, I had a couple of topics that I wanted to get to in regards to current gaming news. I wanted to get to the recent news and hoopla about the EA loot boxes. There's been some memes, some pretty good memes in that respect. People are talking about them being surprises, not loot boxes. We'll talk more about that later. Halo Waypoint has released information concerning the Halo flights for Halo Reach on the PC. And it looks like it could be playable. Again, they said this before, but it could be playable by the end of the month. So maybe we could look for, in June, some way of playing Halo. Reach. I think it's just the campaign as well, which I wonder if we can play with other people. More questions. Jedi Fallen Order also had a recent bit of a interview done by Lucasfilm, according to the article. It said something about the decision to make the combat in Jedi Fallen Order not allow for decapitations actually comes from Lucasfilm themselves. So we'll talk a bit about that speculation mostly. The MMO Roundtable is this week, as it is every week. And for this week's topic, it's going to be how many players is the massive multiplayer online game. So in the MMO acronym, how many players is that massive number? I want to know from your guys' opinion. Of course, make sure if you decide to come onto the show, which it's open to everybody. The MMO Roundtable is open to anybody with a mic who's willing to join the voice channel and have a discussion about essentially whatever topic we're discussing. So if you have some 2 cents to put in there, put it in, but also be prepared. If somebody disagrees with you, they might have something to say. So that's kind of the aspect of the roundtable, is that we're all just talking. I mean, I'm not sitting at the front of the round table. It's just my show. So it's more of like, I just like to think of it as a place where we can go and equally talk and share ideas, which is why we do the format and the way we do, which is where everybody comes on, says their piece, and then we get to kind of talk about maybe aspects that we agree or disagree or whatever else. But what do you consider to be the player count required for an MMO? In a nutshell, is essentially what the discussion topic this week is. But I'll get to that later. MMOs on the go, of course, comes after that. And that's our main MMO segment that, we talk about whatever is going on in the world of MMOs that I find interesting or worth remarking about. There's some interest there. Actually, there was just one particularly interesting thread about Guild Wars 2 on the MMORPG subreddit, which I give so much crap to all the time, but I figured we'd go into that. And one thing I also realized we didn't go into before, which I know is going to make Limpos really happy, is we didn't look at our WoW video that we did. We never looked at the comments. I need to do that on stream. But we can do that towards the end whenever I'm doing the call-in segment, where you guys can ask me questions. You can either voice chat me in Discord, just like on the MMO Roundtable, or you can just at me in Twitch chat if you're at your work PC and you can't really get to a microphone. Ooh, we'll talk about SWTOR removing some of its free-to-play restrictions. And then finally, there's been an interview from Mark Jacobs concerning the state of the beta and the NDA in Camelot Unchained. So some more news in Camelot Unchained. And I think I got all of the front show stuff out of the way. So now we can talk about video games and talk about my first topic. First, I want to say hello to everybody. Thank you for joining me today. thank you for watching as always. And if you're watching after the fact, thank you as well. The first topic that I'll get to today is going to be concerning these loot boxes. Now, we talk about loot boxes a lot, and that's because, well, they're just prominent in all sorts of gaming, but especially prominent in MMOs, right? As you guys know, MMOs have various forms of microtransactions and loot boxes. SWTOR has loot boxes. ESO, Elder Scrolls Online has loot boxes. Star Trek has loot boxes. A lot of the, even some of the more prominent MMOs right now have loot boxes, and they're worth talking about. There was a recent article that was put out, and it was apparently somebody had the ability to listen in to some kind of like hearing at the UK Parliament of Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee. And so it's pretty comical. I'll show you guys the article on screen, but apparently the quote that they put at the headline is they're not loot boxes, they're surprise mechanics, and they're quote unquote quite ethical. And so apparently this is one of those cases where you have an audience who knows nothing about something, and then they essentially get tricked or leveraged by people who do know a lot about something. And in this case, it's the committee that doesn't really know what loot boxes are. And so essentially EA can kind of, obfuscate whatever it is as much as they possibly want to in order to make sure people don't know that it's microtransactions. I'm not going to rant again this week, but this is a quick reminder that this is an exact example of what I'm talking about when it comes to like, oh, but my game has this kind of business practice and it's not that bad, so it's fair. It's like, the problem with it is that it comes on the back of things like this, where people obfuscate, and developers in this case, or the publisher rather, wants you to not understand what a microtransaction is. They want you to understand, or they don't want you to understand what's considered fair. They want fairness to be kind of up in the air, right? Because that makes it more morally ambiguous for you to want to purchase something. So it's just like, this is another example of that, where you look at like, all they want to do is essentially try and mislead you into having an argument about something that's maybe not completely related to what you're trying to argue. So next thing you know, you're arguing, oh, loot boxes aren't whatever, they're surprises. And it's like, well, in the context of this, like, it's gambling, and that's the case that's being brought forward. But why don't they just address whatever case is being brought forward? Well, as you can imagine, just like with microtransactions and free-to-play games, they don't want you to be wise. Like, they don't want you to understand how the sauce is made, or the sausage is made, if you guys prefer that particular statement. But they don't want you to know how the sausage is made, because once you start to realize that, like people like me telling you essentially how they monetize you guys and how they affect your psychology, and knowing that they can get you to spend just that much more money, right? And how by unlocking subscription models into just free-to-play games, you actually drastically increase the amount of money that you can make, because no longer are you beholden by a $15, sorry, 5 as in like the 3 5s, $15 cap. You don't have that anymore. And sure, people had multiple accounts before. I did as well. I'm sure you could count those as an anomaly then. And so the couple of people who had multiple accounts, it's like, really, $15 is your kind of ceiling for how much money you're going to make with a subscription game. Free-to-play games, whenever they came over and kind of blew up, give a little bit of a fedora tip there, they kind of figured out that they can just kind of pass that whole idea of a cap, get rid of a cap, make it seem more like a free floor, right? Like no barrier to entry, so there's no floor. The floor is easily accessible. But then whenever you have the floor, you don't know how high the ceiling is. You don't actually know. And you see that in Black Desert Online fans all the time. It's just crazy that they don't understand that just because you can get pets from an event doesn't mean that having to buy pets, even though they say you don't need them, is kind of a pay-to-win thing. People don't want to admit that. They're like, oh, but you could win it from 60 billion events over the course of 3 years. It's like, guys, do you not understand how this model works? That's how they make money. Because they know nobody's going to wait for, 3 years or 3 months or whatever for something to become playable. They'd rather just do it right away. Like, people, on average, especially in America, would rather just pay the money forward. right? They would rather just pay the money to get the success. And I just think that this is kind of one of those scenarios, the conversation about loot boxes, where people's true colors can kind of come out. And you have to understand that there is psychology that comes into play. And you are not holier than thou. You can be tricked too. You might think that you're wise, but sometimes it takes getting tricked, like I've been tricked, right? By developers and by marketers or by publishers and just various types of people. No one in particular. I don't feel like calling anybody out. But the point is that once you've been kind of like hyped up and you realize that maybe MMOs are kind of overhyped in some ways, or at least a lot of them were overhyped, you start to come back to reality. But it kind of depends on where you go from there. Like some people might have the idea of, you know what? I'm just gonna go ahead and be forward thinking now and just think ahead. Like I want the games to be better in the future. And I feel like I have some of that too. But then there's also a crowd of people who's like, well then let's just make it how it used to be. And in this case though, the funny thing is that they have a good argument. Sometimes the people who are stuck in the past are very much needed because they surprise everybody by holding on to culture first off, but they also surprise everybody by actually being the rational voice. And in this case, you know, looking back and seeing what the old games did right and what the new ones are doing right or doing wrong, and then trying to make that comparison is very important for the longevity, obviously, of the market, but also it allows us to examine things like loot boxes and think about, you know, does this decision in EA's case affect us as MMO fans? And it actually does. That's the thing is that if we could fight loot boxes at the core, which is companies like EA, if we could fight them there and actually get parliament in different countries, different committees, and even the government itself in some countries like America to actually start to care about the effect of things like loot boxes and kind of essentially the zero-sum game that they can sometimes operate under, I feel like you're going to start to see a lot of run over into the MMO market. People are going to start asking the same questions there. Like, why is it that Elder Scrolls Online, one of the most prevalent MMOs right now, and one of the most like kind of fetishized, I'm sorry, but people are kind of like crazy fans for it, has loot boxes in it. It's just crazy that it goes under the radar. And I know you guys know because y'all tell me all the time in chat. Like, I learned from you guys in chat. That's the funny thing. And I've played ESO. But chat is the one that will tell me, guys, it actually has, it's not just DLC. It's not just premium freemium. It's not just you're paying a subscription. You could also buy loot boxes. Also pay for XP boost. It's like, it's crazy. Like ESO is like, you guys know the Infinity Gauntlet? Here, I'm going to show you what ESO is like. All right, let's get a big size one. Can we get a large size picture of this? I need a large one. Settings. Cool. Let's do large. I want one that I can draw on, if you're wondering why. Okay. Illustration time. This is like everybody's favorite part about Discord, I feel like. Or sorry, about streaming. This podcast will require an edit to remove the bot message from. What bot message? Oh, sorry. Sometimes you read out loud whenever you're an extrovert. Anyway, so here's my illustration, everybody. And I know, sorry if you're listening to this, you can't really see this, but I've got my Infinity Gauntlet here. And what I noticed about ESO is it kind of operates under the guise of a lot of people, simply because it's, you know, it has so many different kinds of business models that it's literally confusing. Oh, there was a bot that came in the chat. That's hilarious. Anyway, so this one over here, we're going to have subscription fee. Let me get my pen. So we're going to have a subscription fee. Boom. That's my subscription fee gauntlet. Or, you know, crystal, whatever you want to call it. Stone. Sorry if I want to be, you know, correct according to lore. That's subscription. DLC. Right? DLC. Microtransactions. Loot boxes. Loot boxes. What am I missing, guys? I know I'm missing something in chat. Expansions. Full purchasable expansions that cost full price. There we go. Let's do it. We did it. We made my analogy work. Buy to play? Ooh, thank you, Artifact Gamer. Let's go. Look at that. Sub. We said subs, DLC, microtransactions, right? Buy to play. This one was buy to play. That one was full price expansions. And then the last one was what did we say the last one was? Microtransact. So yes, the what did it cost? This is my story about ESO, okay? I just wanted to illustrate to you guys. It's crazy how a lot of this kind of operates under the eyes of people. It's like, when did we think it was okay, or when did we allow it to be okay to get away with essentially having 5 to 6 different business models within the same game and be purchasing it essentially none the wiser? I mean, it's like, no wonder why they make so many expansions. They're making money. They're making money. So like, I'm impressed from the business aspect. Sorry, I love business, guys. So sometimes I'm going to seem conflicting to you because I love video games. I love art, obviously, and I love the art of MMOs, and that means more to me than the business. But I also love good business, and it's hard not to see the Infinity Gauntlet and be like, damn, ZeniMax just pulled out the gauntlet, dude, and they just hit it all. They're like, let's monetize everything. I mean, it's just crazy. And then, again, it seems like people are none the wiser. I don't really care. Because, hey, as long as it offers my kind of way that I prefer to monetize, then it's fine. So then it just includes everybody's favorite way of monetizing. Except maybe expansions, paid expansions. I don't know if that's really people's favorite thing. But let's get back to loot boxes specifically. Let's see if we can actually find the hearing, or the quote. Does anyone in chat know exactly where the quote, where you get to hear Carrie Hopkins, the EA Vice President of Legal and Government Affairs, actually say that it's kind of like a surprise? Can somebody remind me where that's at? Because I could have swore that they linked it in this article originally. For some reason I can't find it. Oh, it's an archive of the broadcast. Here we go. I knew it was in here somewhere. 1543, huh? 1543. All right, let's listen to this.
There is no intervention the company would make against someone who appears to be playing for increasingly excessive periods. It's just not data that you gather and use in that way. Well, you gather it, you don't use it in that way.
I think, yeah, our position or our current approach is to resist designing a game that encourages people to play it or engage in an unhealthy way, to provide tools and reporting for
what if they do it anyway? That's the point, isn't it? If you're in the drinks industry, you say we don't encourage people to become alcoholics, but nevertheless some people do. And actually, there's a whole raft of duty of care practices the drinks companies have adopted to try.
And this actually looks like it would have been really entertaining to watch live, doesn't it?
But I don't see any evidence of you doing that.
See a dude just out there kind of squirming, making it work.
That's fair. We don't currently try to. We don't have a mechanism in place that automatically sets limits on that.
You see how he tiptoed around that? Did you guys see how he tiptoed around that? Yeah. Can somebody give Brass Monkey access to post the link? But do you guys see how he masterfully was finding a way to admit something without actually saying truth? He was like, he was just like, and he was like masterfully just like dodging from like point to the next point. That was just, let's go back and watch that 10 seconds. That was impressive.
Usage. So it'd be quite easy to identify people that were playing over a set amount of time. I think it's interesting sort of us because there are lots of reports. I mean, my colleague Simon Hart has read things out from a quick Google search. We've quoted newspaper articles. I quoted what Prince Harry thought. We've quoted what the WHO thinks. And your response to all of it is that basically all these people are wrong, and you're right, and there's not a problem, and you're so confident there's not a problem you don't even mention it.
I believe I said I wouldn't presume to say any of those people are wrong, and I
Well, we can go, but the record will show what you said about what Prince Harry said at the beginning, which is pretty close to saying you thought he was wrong.
That's fair. When I was referring to Mr. Hart's reference to
wow, they
self-reported.
The American is just out of his element.
I wouldn't.
The American's like, oh shit, wait,
if
people
any-
can
if I
just
was,
like
you know, if I was
bust
a
my
parent
ass
teacher
and I actually have to
saying
like
about
defend my point by
charges
point.
and Fortnite, I
And
think
they
this
remember what I
yours
said and
is-
hold it against me. Oh
you cannot
shit.
give me any
Yeah, he
encouragement
looks like
at
he's
all.
not used to how
This is
things
an
maybe
issue
work
that-
in other countries.
So I think we do care about it, and I would.
Thanks for the link, by the
Do
way.
you consider loot boxes to be an ethical feature of your games? Kerry?
Well, first, we don't call them
In
loot
America,
boxes.
you
I
say
think that
it.
was
Whatever term you wish
Good
to apply
point.
to them,
Good point.
do you consider them ethical?
So what we look at as surprise mechanics, but I think it's important to look at this. So if you go to a I don't know what your version of Target is, but a store that sells a lot of toys, and you do a search for surprise toys, what you'll find is that this is something people enjoy. They enjoy surprises. And so
I'm sorry, everybody
it's-
who's listening
it's
to
something
this.
that's been part of toys
You're
for
hearing
years,
them, but
whether
you're not
it's
seeing
Kinder
the
Eggs
context.
or
You're not seeing the
Hatchimals
looks on my
or
face.
LOL.
You're missing a lot of like
surprise.
very important context here. Okay?
We do think the way that
You gotta
we
watch
have
it live.
implemented these kind of mechanics, and FIFA, of course, is our big one. Our FIFA Ultimate Team and our packs is actually quite ethical and quite fun, enjoyable to people. We agree.
How-
with the
how
UK
can you make
Gambling
that
Commission,
claim,
the
though?
Australian
How
Gambling
can you make an
Commission, and many
ethical
other
claim like
gambling
that?
commissions that they aren't
You don't get to
gambling, and we
singularly
also
make
disagree
such
that
a
there's
claim,
evidence that
especially
shows
when
it
so
leads to
much people are
gambling.
questioning
Instead, we think it's like
ethicalness,
many
right?
other
Because
products
I mean,
that people
I'm not going to
enjoy
say
in a very
ethics are
healthy way,
subjective meme exactly,
and
but
like the
I
element
mean
of
they are in
surprise.
some cases, right?
So just to be absolutely clear, you're
Wow, she looks terrified right there. Look at her questioning her reality. And by the way, do not harass any of these people. I do not agree with any harassment, right? Targeted or not, of people, whether they work for EA or not. But we can do it for the memes, baby.
absolutely.
Woohoo! Did y'all see that? I just love observing body language. Look at this. Okay? The realization sets in right there, like, ah, fuck. She's just like, oh, fuck. This girl's like, all right, that's how you want to report it. And she's just writing it down, what she's saying, and she's just like, oh, fuck, they got that on record. Oh, man. It's hard not to see that. Sorry, I can't not see that. Thanks for this
Loot
link, by the way.
boxes or surprise mechanics.
Raz
have
Monkey
no
13, I
ethical
appreciate it.
grounds whatsoever.
When your heart breaks.
So I think you're recharacterizing
The more
my
money you make,
language.
the
What
more
I said is
ethical
I
you
think
are.
the way we've implemented our FIFA Ultimate Team packs is ethical.
I'm a capitalist
other
as
than
well,
FIFA,
Carlo, but I
and
also would rather believe more in a social democratic type of capitalistic environment where there does have to be some level of measure put into place to deal with things being exploited. Because let's talk about loot boxes for a second. You know, sometimes I like to go into detail about like maybe what the opposing argument is, and the majority of the time that you have a counter argument about loot boxes is people saying essentially like, you're not putting a gun to anybody's head, so how are you actually making people addicted to such a thing, right? And it's almost as if people forgot that gambling has existed for thousands of years and has been addicting for thousands of years. So addictive behaviors are more so whatever you contract whenever you encounter like a particular thing that interests you a lot, like to an insane level. So like, it's not often that you're just addicted to video games like on its own basis. It's not an illness on its own, right? Video games that exist for thousands of years. So it's like video games themselves don't make you addicted, but there's things that video games make you feel that can make you feel addictive. And there's habits that they could make or make come to the forefront, I guess. Sorry, that was a horrible way to put that. I guess they could bring feelings up, right? Where maybe you feel a certain kind of way whenever you play a game or whatever else, right? They can definitely transcend just the piece of technology itself, right? There's art there. I'm not going to deny that. But you also have to think about there has to be some level of regulation Otherwise, loot boxes will continue to exist, and not just continue to exist, but also essentially continue to exist in a very disingenuous way. And that's sort of my problem is whenever people bring up the criticism of, yeah, but it's like, nobody's forcing you to buy a loot box. It's like, well, they're not necessarily forcing somebody, but when the majority of your game's progression is locked behind a loot box, for example, in the case of Star Trek, you kind of are forcing people to buy a loot box. Because by putting your main form of progression behind a loot box, thanks for the sub, by the way. Welcome to the Nor Club. Let me let that image disappear out of the way and Adden finish his joke really quickly. And I'll give you a fedora tip. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. But yeah, you just when it comes to monetization, loot boxes are one of those things where on the surface it might be hard to ask why is it addictive. But I've told this story before, so I'll tell a condensed version. Growing up, you know, video games were like an escape for me. Thanks for the sub, Ace Huel. Appreciate it. I think that's a resub. Yeah, it's a resub for 5 months, and Brass Monkey was for 2 months. Thank you to both of you. Resub. But I tell this story sometimes. But when I was younger, you know, the internet and more so MMOs were kind of like my safe ground. Like that was where I could still have a social life while still being a massive nerd, right? And that's where I could meet people and make friends maybe when I was not necessarily having the ability to do that in person. I moved so much when I was young that I moved like 20 times when I was young. So, and I've counted it. It was like 20 or 22 times. So I never really got to like set my roots up, but online I could do that, you know? Like I had the place that I could set my roots up. But when I was playing Habbo Hotel back then, they had casinos. And you might just think, oh, Habbo Hotel, what is that? You know, like, and I like to show how Habbo Hotel, if I can spell casino right.
When you
all right, and so people will build these like casinos, and then they'll allow you to. Oh no, that's not. Here we go. People build these casinos with dice, and they'd play blackjack. So obviously, the person to get 21 would win, or the person with the closest number would win. And so you could hit, stay, that sort of stuff. And at first glance, it just seems like an innocent party game, right? An innocent party game, an innocent social game. But I'll tell you some of the more kind of sinister aspects of it. And it's maybe not so readily available. The thing is that when you introduce certain very addictive mechanics into your game, whether or not you want to admit it, you are held liable for how that affects people. You are. If I put a seizure software in my game and people have seizures, I'm liable to that. If I have a game that causes seizures, even though I didn't purposely do it, but people are still having seizures from it, I'm liable for that. I'm still liable. It's not just because I did it on accident that I'm no longer liable. And so what I mean is that sometimes you come up with mechanics that are very fun and very addicting, but those mechanics do have to have checks and balances in place, right? Like if you're going to have a game in the case of Habbo, which allowed at one point kids to play the game, you can't have gambling in a game with kids because kids don't know how to make organized and frankly speaking, educated decisions. And so to go back to myself as a kid, I had no clue what I was doing, okay? So I would get furniture, which is kind of like your currency in this game, and then I would just bet it away and keep losing. And it's because the thrill of winning for me was far greater than the loss of like a particular item. So I got really addicted to gambling in this game, to where I would just bet everything. Sometimes I would just go crazy and bet the house. And guys, I was like 9 when I was playing this game. So think about this. I'm like between 7 and 9 years old playing Habbo Hotel, gambling online with furniture, which might not be a real monetary value, but I could sell it for money. I could have sold my stuff for money. And now you start to kind of understand the problem is next thing you know, kids have this access. I was a kid. I'm gambling. I have no idea what gambling is or what the problems of gambling is. Like I don't have the maturity to understand when to fold him, when to hold him. Like I didn't know any of that shit. I didn't know when to fold and when to hold. I just always was betting double down, right? I just want to keep winning because that was the fun part to me. And so it starts innocently in that sense. But when it became more sinister is when I did things like I stole money. Like when I and I'm telling you guys right now, when I was a young kid, I was not in the best of place, okay? I had a very difficult childhood. And whenever I would play Habbo Hotel, my idea was like, man, if I could just like get somebody's credit card, I could buy more furniture. So what do you think I did as a kid? I found any way that I could, essentially, to try and like get a credit card. Guys, I'm like 7 or 8, years old at this point. I don't have the maturity to know really what I'm doing, right? And I'm doing this horrible thing and spending money on a video game, my parents' money, but not even really my parents' money because my parents didn't have money. It was like my grandma or just whoever was willing to let me use their credit card. I would just beg them, hey, like, buy me some currency in this game. Buy me some currency in this game. So it wasn't really like stealing blatantly. I mean, oftentimes it was more of like just, really wanting it. But I absolutely did steal my grandma's credit card as a kid. And I'm telling you guys this for a reason. This is not a comfortable story. Rest in peace, my grandma, by the way. By the way, we made up. We were fine. Obviously, she loved me and everything else. But I tell you guys this story because it's not a pretty story. It's not, right? Like, I grew up in a not so great neighborhood. I didn't have the same morals that other people did. And so I needed a game to actually have some level of protection there for things like gambling. Because there wasn't any check there, it just made my mind run amok, right? And so I tell you guys this because you guys probably think I'm a pretty intelligent person, right? Many of you probably think I'm at least somewhat smart. And I often hear people say, oh, people who fall for that are stupid. Am I stupid because I fell for it? I mean, I was a kid, right? Am I unable to fall for things whenever I'm a kid? It's like, of course, you make mistakes. The thing is that this is still working when people were well into their adult years because at this point, it's become normal place. People are almost just excusing it, right? It's not really that big of a problem, these microtransactions, these loot boxes. Why does it bother you so much? These businesses need to make money. When the consumer starts to protect the corporation, that's when you know you have a big problem. That's when you know you have a problem. Like, you need to make sure that that's not happening, right? That's a big problem. And like I said, I tell you guys this story. It's not a flattering story. You might even have different opinions of me. You might think of me as a bad person. Whatever your opinions are of me, though, you can't deny that I don't really seem like a stupid guy. So how did I fall for it? Well, because like I said, kids can fall for things. Even adults can fall for things. And the reason why sometimes it might come across as me being like, publishers are evil, that's not my intention. And I tell you guys that in most of my Death of a Game videos. I don't want you to just blindly hate somebody or a company just because I say that they did a bad thing or because they did a morally questionable thing. It's not that simple in my eyes. You have to look at the totality of it, right? Like, there's multiple things that you have to kind of there's multiple things that you have to look at. But I tell you this story again because I want you to realize that these publishers, and in some cases even developers, right, depending on the kind of company, they're very good at knowing how psychology works. So they know how to take advantage of your thoughts and your desires and your wants. And so that's why don't be so blind to support and defend consumerism, first off, but don't support corporatism. Don't just support these corporations just because you think they have to make money. Because Super Bunny Hop did a video on this topic. Do these companies need to make more money? No, they don't. In fact, they're saving more money. What a surprise, right? Things are becoming cheaper. Why doesn't Blizzard want to have or not have layering? You want to know the real reason? I don't really think it has to do with the population on the servers. I just think it's because they don't want to pay for it. I think that their current server tech is much cheaper and more efficient than what they were previously using. It can't just be a technical thing. It's nearly always linked to money. You always have to trace things back to money. Knowing people well enough, the issue isn't that kids are getting addicted to gambling. They couldn't even take their time to spit in their direction. What it is oftentimes is that they don't like the notion of loot. But kids being in danger sounds better. I mean, I'm sure some people make that argument, like maybe people just don't like loot boxes in general, and so they make the argument in totality. But I genuinely think it is a danger to kids, as I explain my story. I genuinely do think it's an issue. And I think that it's a very addicting thing. I also think it's a poor value exchange. If you want my true opinion on it, I think a loot box is a poor value exchange because for every rare thing you win many not so rare things. So oftentimes you think that you have the illusion of which You're winning a lot, right? When you play Hearthstone, you think you're winning a lot of rares, but in reality, you're opening 50 packs and getting like 5 rares. That's not really good odds, right? And so I think the bigger thing is, and what I like to preach is, I believe that TCGs are ethical. Like, I believe you can have a TCG game and make it ethical. That being said, I think that the reason why TCGs don't get nearly as bad as a rep as a CCG does is because in a TCG, you're keeping your value. I think that's the main problem with loot boxes in my eyes, is I view them as a flawed proposition. For me, it's a flawed proposition because it's essentially saying I'm going to give this amount of money for the non-guarantee that I'll get essentially a rare item, when in reality, statistically speaking, I'm likely to get a non-rare item that I can't exchange in most cases. I can't really exchange for the equal value at least. And it's kind of like a loss. You see what I'm saying? It's like, it seems like a sunk cost. Like, I'm going to be constantly putting in more money to maybe win something. And by the way, I've been playing Hearthstone for a long time, and I don't play it anymore, but I've had 2 accounts that I've spent hundreds of dollars on. So, again, I don't want you guys to think that I'm the arbiter of goodness, and I'm perfect, and I don't make mistakes. I've spent lots of money on that game, because that was my first experience with a CCG. But that's why I'm sitting here being like, guys, CCG is not the same thing as a TCG, and a TCG is not the same thing as a loot box. So people want those arguments to get tangled together so everyone thinks it's kind of the same thing. But a loot box, I believe it to be morally questionable. I believe it to be logically questionable, and I also believe it to be not in the best interest of the consumer, which is what I care about the most. So that's my argument against the loot. I would look into Stormbound. Anyone who doesn't like Hearthstone, I mean, it's an amazing CCG, my favorite by far. I'll look into it. I would love to play a CCG that doesn't just gouge you for money every time it gets, or every chance it gets. It's definitely easier to show the loot box issue as an attack on children instead of saying, hey, there's a bunch of adults and teens who spent assloads of money on FIFA loot boxes and are probably facing that's a good point. It's also a lot less insulting. Right? It's a lot less insulting. But no, that's the thing, dynamics, is that that's a good sentiment to call out. It's when people will say it's only cosmetics, is that's what it starts as. Like, I don't like to get stuck into slippery slope fallacies because I believe them to be oftentimes just fear-mongering. So I don't want to sit here and say the future is everybody is a loot box and everything in the game and virtual reality is a loot box. But, I mean, it's kind of hard to not see it get to that conclusion when publishers keep pushing and pushing and getting away with it, right? They keep pushing and they're getting away with it. When people are defending Black Desert Online in the comments, you're kind of just like, guys, they don't give a fuck about you. Maybe I have to be the guy to say that. And I'm not even I'm not a person who likes to cuss a lot. But maybe I need to be the one to say that. Those games don't give a fuck about you, so why are you defending them? Why are you defending their habits? Why are you defending your spending habits on those games? They don't give a fuck about you. So it's strange to see them care so much about these developers who are essentially like a blank face. They barely even have a personality. And that's intentional, I think, by the way. I'm not saying that they couldn't have a personality. I think that they put that wall there, that barrier there. They don't want that open line of communication when they're trying to sneak in your wallet. It's like somebody, hey, you know what? I'll talk about that later, but there's been some recent news that SWTOR put out that they've kind of had some lax in their requirements for and restrictions that they put on paying subscribers and then free-to-play players. And it's exactly related to this, but I'll have to jump to it later. I can voice over if you need it. I'm Dutch after all. That's a good point. Good point. By the way, I had no idea that Armin van Buuren is Dutch. What the hell? Why did nobody ever tell me that? I love listening to Not Giving Up on Love. That song always got stuck in my head. All right, let's talk a little bit about Halo. We talked a lot about loot boxes, and I mean, it might seem like I like talking about it. I can't stand talking about it. But it's something we have to talk about because, like I said, it involves MMOs, whether we want it to or not. All right, so there's been some recent news put out about Halo. and it's good news. Let me scroll down here to find the exact one that I'm looking for. All right, PC flighting. Here we go. If everything goes according to plan, our first flight for Halo Reach on MCC PC will be next week to a small subsection of registered Halo insiders. So that's probably not going to be us.
But you've got the wrong guy.
Thanks for subbing, RC Win, by the way. 17. For a tip, appreciate it. Or is that a resub? I hate how you have to go. Oh, you're a 7-month resub. God, I'm so insulting. Let me give you a couple more tips in case I missed any of the way. I appreciate the patronage for it. I'm excited about Halo, and oftentimes it's hard to find the comparisons between MMOs and Halo. And if I can bring the comparison together to see why I love them so much, and I love them hand in hand, is because Halo was about the community as well. So let me say that again. Halo was about the community. That was the main thing in Halo. It sounds strange because it's like it's an online game. How is it about the community? Well, Halo 1 wasn't really an online game, right? It wasn't really an online game. It didn't really become an online game until the PC, and even then, it was still a community game because it was all based on, guess what? Server browser. Server browser games have communities. You have to acknowledge that. Counter-Strike, Half-Life, these games have personality. They have some level of community aspect. And LAN, if you've ever heard of the term, you guys ever heard of the term LAN? The term LAN, the term LAN, LAN. Sorry, in the middle of that, I started thinking about the series that I told you guys about. That I don't want to tell you the name yet, but we have a series that's coming out soon that is on particular acronyms or terms in which we describe them. So I was thinking, I almost said the name of the series, which is why I'm like almost like red-faced right now. But I didn't. Okay. Anyway, if you've ever heard of the term LAN, LAN is, well, the beautiful thing whenever your friend brings over his computer or his TV and wants to play a game with you. It kind of hardly exists anymore, except maybe if you live in a place that doesn't have a lot of space. Like if you live in Korea or you live in Japan. They have PC bangs and arcades and stuff like that that are still thriving because essentially space is an issue. Halo was a LAN game. The primary way that I played Halo growing up was LAN, was with other people. So it was always a social activity for me. And that's what I love the most about the game. Hey, what's up, Ion? Thanks for subbing, or resubbing, because I know you resubbed before. I appreciate the 15-month resub. That might be one of my longest resubs. Local area network, yeah. It's not so easy whenever you don't just see it on your screen. Which for Halo OG players, we're used to the term local area network. But now that I've gotten a little bit older and apparently less community-centric, it's almost like I forgot what the word even means. That's pretty horrible. Anyway, LAN was essentially the main reason, or the main way that I played Halo. And so the reason why, for me, I see it as a natural fit for my community is that the majority of us prefer to have community interactions together anyway. And LAN is a big thing that we like to talk about in the sense of an MMO, which is just obviously community interaction. It doesn't really work in the same way as LAN because it's not server browsers, it's a persistent universe. So it's more LAN, almost like logging into the game, than it is like having to really focus on like getting your computer next to your friend, because even if it's next to your friend, you're not playing in a local area network. You're playing on the web. So anyway, I'm excited about this. And do I think I'm going to get in? Probably not. But one thing I'm wondering about, and I've seen no confirmation about yet, is if it is just a campaign flight, which is what I've heard, by the way, guys, that this particular first flight is going to be a campaign flight for the Reach, for Halo Reach on PC. Does that mean it's going to have co-op? Are they going to let us play with other people? Because if that's the case, then that would be awesome if we can already test that aspect. Because I'm curious to see how it feels with 4 people. You know, I want to feel the FPS. I want to see how that stuff pans out. But I don't know. I don't know if they'll let you do co-op or split screen yet, right? Or is that going to be playable already? I don't know. If they made that playable already, I'd be pretty impressed, but I find it hard to believe. I ran a gaming club at my high school. We would bring in 360s and shit and have like 20 people. Yeah, and that's the shit that I miss, man. Granted, it isn't exactly like everyone had either the incentive nor capability to go to LANs. No, they didn't. And that's a good point, Limp Boss. It's very interesting, isn't that? It's interesting because you would think that, oh, LAN has like faded away. Obviously, LAN hasn't faded away. Events still exist, and events are bigger scale than they've ever been, right? But when we say LAN has gone away, mainly what people are talking about, I think, is kind of more like local LAN. And I know that's a bit of a meme, but hear me out. I mean more amongst your friends, kind of like the casual LAN, you know, like where you're just landing with the buddies and you're just split screening with the buddies. I think that's definitely gone down. I mean, co-op games in general, and I feel like you know this, Limpboss, because you play a lot of them. But co-op games in general are just less frequent. There's not nearly as many co-op games. And so, you know, with Halo 5 having came out and it has no split screen in a Halo game, I mean, obviously people are starting to think that maybe LAN isn't as big as a focus anymore. But I think it's worth pointing out that maybe esports-wise, esports is LAN, right? So esports and LAN are still big. It's just not big on the smaller scale. And so, like, anything that I can do in that respect, for me, I see it as a victory. So that's why I want to have a WoW community for the Horde server in WoW Classic, or the Horde faction on a PvP server. Hopefully, our PvP, you know, knock on whatever this table is made out of. I don't even know if it's wood, but it's something. I'll knock on that. But then also I want to have a Halo community. So anyway, I'm excited to see what more news transpires from Halo Reach and its flight on PC. And I hope it's gonna be a little bit more successful than WoW Classic's beta run so far, because it kind of is a beta test in a way. The flights are beta tests for Halo on the PC. And that was me throwing a little bit of shade at the moment right now. WoW Classic is having some bugs in beta, and I've watched a couple of them that are pretty crazy, and I just think like both of these games can't really afford to have a lot of bugs because they're so close to launch. Their testing phases, I feel like Halo is better in that respect because it can can have a longer timeline. It's more than just 2 months, like in the case of WoW. Man, I feel like I'd be getting nervous if I was those companies and I'm watching my game get beta tested and it's still having a lot of bugs and issues and stuff like that. Like, I'd be like, man, I have 2 months for this? Like, my heart would just start pumping. All right, let's transition to the next topic. Oh, okay, there's some more news. Dynamics posted something. This is going to be a busy week. A post around Halo support beta for insiders, playlist on updates. Wednesday, posts with info for Flight 1 for PC Reach, and the June development blog. Going to be heads down getting all the words prep this week. Who is ready for all the info? Interesting. I'm excited. I'm very much excited. I can't wait to play some campaign with you guys, and I also can't wait to just play some more Halo, because I tell you guys all the time, if Halo Online was legal to play on stream, I would stream a lot more regularly. Play that game. But don't worry, I had, actually, if you guys missed it, on Saturday I streamed some Mafia. I'm trying to get some more Friday, Saturday streams in, because that's when I really want to start streaming earlier in the day for my EU audience whenever I start playing Classic WoW, because I'm actually thinking of adopting an EU stream zone or stream time slot for playing WoW, just because, naturally speaking, I prefer to play earlier in the day than I prefer to play later in the day, just because I have a lot going on later in the day. Like, you know, I have a girlfriend, so I have to deal with that. And then I also have jiu-jitsu, which usually happens at between 5 and 9. And that just totally drains my energy. So it's so hard to play a game and be really focused after that. And that's why I think I'm just going to prefer to play earlier in the day, which is better because I know a lot of my more active players are EU-based anyway. So look for my stream schedule to come out, obviously, closer to release. And it's going to be earlier in the day. And it's probably, I'm going to shoot for like a small time zone or a small time slot, so I don't just burn myself out. So I might shoot for like 3 hours a day or something close to that. But obviously, some days I'm going to play a lot more, than other days I'm not going to play nearly as much. I can't wait to... Well, no, I say that because I don't know how else to say it other than you just have to spend time with your partner. You know, there's no other way to say it than you have to put work and time and effort into your partner. Otherwise, your relationship's going to go to shit. And actually, you know what? I'll use this as an opportunity to shit on another stereotype that I cannot stand. Speaking of Classic WoW, can we get rid of that age-old meme that whenever you play an MMO, all of a sudden your social life just goes to ruin? You can't have a wife, you can't have kids, you can't have a girlfriend, you can't have a life, you can't have anything, okay? You can't even go outside. Like, guys, I know that sometimes we get that way. Sometimes some people get that way. I've been that way before. I've been antisocial as hell playing MMOs. I get it. It's happened to me. But it doesn't mean that it's the only way that it works. I hate that stupid stereotype that if you want to play WoW Classic, you have to give up your girlfriend or give up your wife. It's like, guys, how old are you? 30-something years old if you played Classic WoW? Maybe a little bit younger if you're like me? Guys, why are we still making this meme? Because you actually believe it? You actually believe that you can't, I don't know, balance things? Like, that's not really that funny to me. I'm sorry, but that's one of those jokes and memes I see get pushed all the time. That just makes me want to just face palm. It's like... I have stories from people I played WoW with, and they were not good when talking with relationships and kids. Hey, what do you know, right? I've heard many relationships broke up over WoW, that's for sure. But those are relationships who are playing WoW together. I think that inflates the statistics a little bit, right? Because you're putting your spouse in a pressure cooker of a hard game. And then you're rolling need on their gear. I mean, come on, you're asking for a fight. I'm just kidding. I've never actually done any of that. I've always been a PvP guy, mainly anyway, and oftentimes the girls that I've dated have been PvEers. Okay. So, or role players, but actually both of them have been role players. I should specify. There are people who come from home, work, and then sit in front of the PC until they go to sleep. Yeah, that's true. I just think that it's like, when people act as if that's the only way you can play the game, it kind of pushes away people who otherwise would have been attracted to the game. You know, because they think, oh, so the only way you can play Classic WoW is by like throwing away your life? It's like, guys, the majority of people who played it in the first place were casual. Can we get over this idea of like, oh, we go to WoW Classic subreddit and so like we're all elite players? It's like, most people who are going to play are going to be casuals.
Apathy is death. Apathy is
Thanks for the follow, by the way. Made that. Yeah, sure, ain't the standard. That's a good way to put it. That's a good quote. Actually, couples in WoW usually stay together. I'm not trying to make a claim that I know that they did or didn't. I'm just saying, in my experience, I've seen a lot of bad instances, but that obviously is inflated because the bad ones you're probably more likely going to see on YouTube, right? nerdSlayer just ganked his exes. If it actually, I'll tell you a funny story. I'll tell you a funny story. So my ex I played SWTOR with, and I remember she asked me one time, she's like, can you teach me how to get good at PvP? And I was like, all right, yeah, are you sure? Are you sure you want me to teach you that? Yeah, like I want to be good at PvP. Are you sure? Are you really sure? And I just kept asking, are you sure, over and over again. And then finally she was just like, yes, I'm sure, I'm sure, I'm sure. Made a mistake. I believed her. And I remember she was like in a scenario one time, like in a battleground or whatever. And I was telling her that you know, hit your CC break, hit your CC break. And then all of a sudden she just starts freaking out like and becomes like super flustered. And I'm like, hey, just so you know, when I said that you needed to hit your CC break, I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm just saying you need to hit your CC break. But she was just one of those people who could not see the difference. Whenever I would criticize her play, she couldn't see it as me criticizing her play. She always took it personally. And so, like, looking back, I was like, okay, I am never going to play a game like that with someone again if they can't accept the fact that it's a video game. Because, yeah, that was just one of those things that was like, I'm not saying PvP makes you like that. I've PvP'd with my current girlfriend before. Does she prefer it? No. Can she do it? Yes, she can. I just think it was a problem before because she just, like, didn't actually want to learn. And so it's just one of those things. Sometimes people say that they want to learn and get better at something, and they don't actually mean that they want to get better at it, or they don't really know what it entails. And so once they figure that out, they're like, I don't want that. That's uncomfortable. And usually that's why people don't like PvP, is because it makes them uncomfortable. The four sides of a message most people don't understand. The hardest thing with teaching someone who's close to you is that they usually end up taking things personal. Yep, pretty much. I find. business and playstyle stays separate from personal. Yeah, I think so as well. Like when you're talking about your playstyle or the way that you do things in the game, it's not a personal attack. Like when you guys play Classic WoW with me, if you're dueling me, or if I see you dueling someone else and I watch something and I see that you could have done something that you missed out on, I'm gonna let you know. Not because I hate you, but because I want you to be better. Just like I want you guys to let me know. That's why I want to play with you, is I want people to tell me when I'm messing up, how to play better, right? That's what the point of a community is everybody's helping each other. It's not just like one person is the god and is telling everybody what to do, or you know, everyone is just shitting on each other. No, it's like everybody is telling each other essentially what the errors are in their play whenever you're in that environment to do that. Now, if you're just like going up to random people in public and saying, hey man, you got to walk like this if you want to have maximum quality of walking. Yeah, you're kind of weird, right? Because that's like unsolicited. But when we're playing in a guild together, we're kind of agreeing that we're going to like help each other. So it's like when I duel with somebody, and let's say I'm dueling like a shaman, and he tells me, hey man, if you just kill my grounding totem, you won't get your CC blocked. If I were to say, man, screw you, dude, you don't know anything you're talking about, that's me essentially taking it personal, right? When in reality, it's just a thing, it's a claim that he's making, or a statement that he's making that is verifiable, right? That if I kill the grounding totem, then maybe I can actually cast my CC. So it's just like knowing the difference between criticism when it's directed at play or something that you're doing versus like criticism of your character. I think it's sometimes hard for people to see the difference in that. That's why it's important to know why you criticize things. That's why I always talk about that, is you have to question everything. You have to know why things work and why they don't work, because then otherwise you're no help to anybody if you're just shitting on everything all the time. Like, for example, here's what's not helpful when it comes to criticizing somebody. Let's say I'm playing with Limpos and he wants to play whatever. What class do you want to play again, Limpos? I forgot. Whatever. Let's say you're a warlock. He's playing a warlock and I'm like, hey man, everything you're doing is completely and utterly wrong, and there's literally nothing right that you're doing. If I were okay, priest. If I were to say that to him, could it be true? Possibly. Is it probably true? No. And so essentially my like over exaggerative nature, which is just overly critical for no reason, basically, it's not effective at teaching somebody anything, right? You are not the example of a incompetent player. You're just the example of a player in general. And so what would be more helpful is if I was like, if he was playing a priest again and I was like some priest lord, which I'm not, by the way. I don't even know how to play priest. And I said, oh, well, like if you do this thing in your spec, you'll have this much more effectiveness. Now, here's the beautiful thing, guys. He can disagree. He can say, actually, I disagree. And here's the beautiful thing about MMOs. We can actually figure out who's right, right? How do you figure out who's right? You duel, you play, you look at metrics, you test the math, you min-max, right? So there's ways to figure it out. So it's just like, don't be quick to like tell people like, hey, don't criticize me. Actually be like, if they're in your guild, then maybe they actually care. Maybe they want to help you. Afford them some level of charity. You know? Trying to drop some guild bombs here so I don't have people joining the guild and being assholes. Spam blinding radiance. Wait, did you see that I was playing Divinity? I don't know if you were watching me play Divinity, but I was playing Divinity last night. All right, let's go ahead and move to the MMO Roundtable. We've fucked around long enough. I said I was gonna get to the Jedi Fallen Order stuff, but I'm not gonna get to that now. And also, sorry for my use of F words. This chat, it's very aggressive stream today. Very aggressive. All right, so the MMO Roundtable is a weekly council meeting of passionate but diverse MMO fans who tackle a weekly subject for group discussion with enough perspectives, hopefully, to where we are likely to disagree at least somewhat, and that's always fun. So this is kind of like shout out to Total Biscuit. Somebody showed me his podcast that he used to do back in the WoW days, and he had a segment that was much similar to this. So it's funny how we ended up arriving at a similar conclusion, even though I didn't even know that he had done that before. So anyway, thanks Total Biscuit for coming up with that idea and helping me refine it, because I essentially went back and looked at his podcast and was like, okay, what do I need to change? Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and join the podcast lobby here. And just a reminder to everybody, the topic for this week is going to be what makes the massive in massive multiplayer online massive? What's the number? What's the number required for it to be considered massive, right? What makes a game considered a massive multiplayer online game versus just a multiplayer online game. So what's the number in that massive word, essentially? Hey, what's up, everybody?
Hi. What's up?
Hello.
If we'd like to go maybe in order of people raising their hand. If you just type maybe, I don't know, what meme should we choose to type?
Just type an X in podcast or in the roundtable.
There you go. An X works. So if you'd like to go first to answer the topic at hand, remember how it works is essentially one person goes, they raise their hand, they say their piece, and then we move on to the next person. And we're going to try and remember kind of everybody's particular points, but also obviously everybody remember what your own points are. So whenever we move on to the next point of discussion, which is after everybody said their piece, then we can actually kind of maybe discuss maybe the aspects we disagree on or whatever else. Okay. All right, looks like Card wants to go first.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a interesting one because I think we had quite a lot of good debate on the in the chat actually on Discord, which for people that can't make it for the podcast, the debates are always very much worth watching and partaking in on Discord itself. I think a lot of it also comes down, for me personally, is always the feel of it. Like, if I am in a MMO, so to speak, does it feel like an MMO? And depending on your setting and on the game, an MMO can be like 2,000 people total population on a server, so maybe only 300 are online at a given time. It can feel like an MMO. However, if you're going to be playing something on like the scale of EVE, and there are only 5,000 people logged into EVE, you're probably going to go and feel very, very lonesome. Right. So I don't really think it's about a hard sort of a number, but it's more about, are there people in there? Does it give you the feeling of you're part of a universe, so to speak of?
Okay. We can have the next person go. You can go ahead and go, by the way, guys, if you're in line. Feel free.
Okay, then it's my turn. So I actually agree quite a bit with Card. It's actually more dependent on the world, more so than just an absolute number. But I did think about it, and I think it can actually go as low as 800 to 1,000. And that's, of course, going to be a quite small world, but still far larger than what we're sort of used to in normal multiplayer games. So I think what I thought about was just a single one of the standard WoW continents. And I think around 1,000 people, I think there's like 15 zones. So that's about, 60 people in each zone on average, which means I would say that's a pretty good number. And that's it.
All right. I think it's my turn.
Yes, sir.
So I think it has less to do about how many total people are in the entire game, in the entire world. I think it has to do, for me, it's two things. It's the number, it's the number of people relative to what else I could be doing in a large scale game. So for example, in World of Warcraft, you have 80-man battlegrounds. In PlanetSide, you can have up to 200 to 300 players all in a single fight. Those I would consider massive. That's a massive interaction. And I think that brings me to the second part, is that I think it has to be simultaneous interaction with each other, because you have games like Diablo and Path of Exile, and those have tons of players at any given time. They have an economy where they're interacting with each other sort of abstractly by trading items. But that doesn't feel massive to me. Kind of getting to what Card was saying, it doesn't feel massive to me unless they're all interacting with each other at the same time. So I think it comes down to, I think that the number changes with time, right? I think that in the past, you could have even considered SWTOR MMO, where you had a large number of people in a raid, in a battleground. But I think that number is actually increased over time because we have games like PlanetSide, where there are larger numbers of people. And I think that definition has changed, and it will continue to change. And I think it also needs to be all doing the same thing at the same time.
Okay. I think I'll probably piggyback off of a similar idea of the scale has to change over time, essentially, because otherwise, if it doesn't, then that's essentially saying that the player counts in some of these games aren't increasing. Obviously, they are. And so when you look back to when MMOs and the term MMORPG was first coined, essentially, the idea was that massive multiplayer online game, that idea of massive back then was very, very different than what most people consider massive, even just a couple of years after they coined the term. And the perfect example of that is you ask Raf Koster or Richard Garriott, who both were involved in Ultima Online and also involved in creating the term itself. And early on, the idea, and this is also said in my Asheron's Call video, the idea was just 250 players or 200 players. Like, that was the first idea for what was considered to be massive for a multiplayer game back then, was just 200 players. But I think we can all agree now, as Ulysses sort of said, that that's obviously changed because scale and even like lobby-based games can be more than that sometimes. And so it's like, I think the idea is that if you want to ask how many players is the massive multiplayer online game, I think we have to say that that number has changed over the years. And, I don't know what percent inflation you can add to that number to where it works in current day, but I'm going to say that it's definitely not 200 people. I think we can safely say that. So I think maybe saying like maybe 500 to 1,000 people, that could be a lot more fair. I think Limpos had said 1,000 people. Or was that, I can't remember. One of you guys said 1,000 people as well. So I don't know, maybe 1,000 people is more realistic because of that.
I said 800 to 1,000.
Okay. Go ahead, Osai, by the way. I don't think we hear you. Feels bad. Close your game out, your Discord. Like, make sure to actually close it out and then run it as admin. Usually that fixes it for me. Whoa, my server started lagging. Anybody else see that?
You want to ping on Discord right now?
Huh. My stream's not lagging, which is weird, but my Discord is lagging.
Might just be Discord then.
Yeah, it seems to be that.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Alright, so I wanted to
Oh wait, now we can't hear you anymore.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you now.
Sorry for all these issues.
It's okay.
Anyway,
man.
so what I wanted to add is that I think that the question is kind of too broad because I'd say that the question would be different for sandbox MMORPGs one because like for the sandbox games to feel like really massive, you need to have much more people participating in the different activities.
For some reason, sorry, sometimes you come out really like robot. Come out like a robot. I'm not sure what's happening.
I might have latency to the server.
Oh wait, I heard you for a second.
Yeah, I think it has...
if you can't hear me properly, then I should probably just leave and.
We hear you sometimes, but then you do have a good point, by the way. Tajgun in chat pointed out, just so everybody knows, Osai does have a good point in that he was just bringing up the idea of, in a sandbox game, you have to apply a different standard than, say, for example, in a theme park game, that they couldn't necessarily have the same meaning of the word massive, just simply because the games themselves don't support the same kind of players, or massive. Whatever that number ends up being. I don't think he told us yet what his opinion on that was. I don't know if anyone else caught that, but I did hear the first part that he talked about. the difference between a theme park game and massive in a theme park game, and obviously a sandbox game and the difference of massive in a sandbox game. And I think that that's definitely true. That's definitely been true. I mean, Limpos and I actually recently were talking about Guild Wars, and we can talk about that after. Is Carlo here? Did you want to go next?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Just add to Asaya, it doesn't only come to the type of MMO, it's also the size of the world. Because I think a world that is, I don't know, 1 feet by 1 feet, so 1 cubic feet, doesn't need 1,000 players. But a world that is like, I don't know, 5,000 feet, 5,000 cubic feet need way more players. So it's not only the type of MMO, it's also the size of the world. And I don't know, depending on I think PlanetSide, even though you have 200 people or 200 players battle, you don't need that. You could live with, I don't know, 50 player battles, and it would feel big because the map is small in comparison to other MMOs that have gigantic worlds. Everyone mentioned already this mystical number, which is 1,000. I think 1,000 is a good number to start, and then you would probably have to make a function around it in which you take in consideration which type of MMO it is, how big the world is, and I don't know what type of content you're trying to. Basically, player versus players battle, you probably need more players. If it's player versus AI, you need less players.
This makes me think about. I think we can go ahead and open up the floor, by the way, to everybody else. So, but I was gonna say, does this make anyone else think about the idea of theme park MMOs maybe being less MMO period? I know people don't like to have that discussion because they hate to say which is better per se, but if you're gonna talk about massive, one is clearly more massive than the other.
Can I really quick tell my experience about?
Go
on. So I played SWTOR in the beginning, I think in the beta phase, and I didn't like it, so I stopped it. But then recently I started again, and it felt like, oh, this is basically SWTOR 3, but with MMO of it. And I don't think that's an MMO. It's basically a single-player game which you play online. And nobody can convince me otherwise. Nobody can convince me otherwise. Yeah, there are like multiplayer stuff. You could basically take the storyline from all 6 characters and put it in a single-player game, and nobody would notice the difference.
I think that you're right, and I think SWTOR is kind of the archetypical example of the people claim it's an MMO, but let's be honest, if someone knew nothing about SWTOR and you sat them down in front of the game and you had them play it, they would not know it's an MMO. They would not know.
Well, one of the first things my girlfriend actually told me in that respect, it's a funny meme, but she said, "Are those real players?" Whenever I was running to like the next quest zone, she was watching me play one time. She was like, "Are those real players?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that is a real player. Look at him in the natural habitat." As we like ran by him in SWTOR. Of course, we didn't interact with him. We just ran to the next quest zone. But I always remembered that ever since then. Are those real players?
I would put into, because like, yeah, is a theme park MMO less of an MMO? I'm not really sure, because it depends a bit on what your focus is. Like, if you're taking on a PvE enemy, maybe even in the open world, like, you can still see it in World of Warcraft at times. Like, you can have 40, 80 people fighting a boss. I mean, that's still a relatively massive fight. And especially in comparison, because I want to bring that one in, it's like some other games that people call MMOs, like things like World of Tanks, for example, which is just a lobby-based shooter. But it is an MMO, and according to the Guinness Book of World Records, it is the largest MMO ever.
Yeah, I agree that can be really silly. Like I said, I think that's why narrowing it down to simultaneous interaction. So, like, you know, if the lobby is 100v100 in World of Tanks, I think that would be different, right? But it's not.
Well,
but even then,
well,
yeah,
usually,
sorry.
distinguish it by him also saying that it needs to be a persistent world, because unlike lobby games, MMOs just stay the same. Like, the world doesn't really change depending on who's in there at
It's not
what
about-
time. It just continues existing.
Yeah,
it's
that's
persistent. And that's one of the sort of major points that MMOs do differently to your standard lobby-based multiplayer.
I
It is
hear that.
continue, yeah.
Go
Yeah,
on.
there's also some level of persistence in some of those games too, like Guild Wars 1, like we always talk about. It's a bit of an anomaly, but it has some persistence in it, even though it's kind of a lobby game.
It is kind of a lobby game.
Hey,
it's one of those games that's
You've got the wrong guy. I'm good at
almost
shooting
not
people,
an
cracking
MMO.
wise, and pretending to know
Jan
everything.
Drakak, welcome
I think
to the Nor
what
Club.
you feel like.
Thanks for your support.
Let Ulysses speak up.
Oh, I was just going to say that that I personally I like persistence, obviously, in my MMOs, but I'm not actually convinced to what degree you need persistence for it to be an MMO, whether that's necessary to the definition. It's just something I haven't. I don't think I've thought sufficiently about yet.
Well,
Okay,
what
Carlos,
would you say? How would you change?
Let Carlos go.
What do you guys think about then MMOs, or what you call instance MMOs, like Ninth Circle or Vindictus? Could you consider those things MMO, or even Dauntless? Would you guys consider that MMOs?
Not really.
Not really, yeah.
I actually would if it was enough people, but I think I'm alone on that in here.
I mean, I think it's, and the fact is, like, if you look at what it says massive multiplayer online. So the criteria in this one would be, what is massive? And okay, a lobby-based MMO is online and it is multiplayer. So the question comes down to, is it massive? And I guess if you're really looking at the core of this question, like, yeah, if I'm going to have 200 tanks facing off in each other in a world of tanks, then I'm starting to feel like this feels more like an MMO, because I got a lot of people in the same place going at it. Whereas if I compare it to like an MMO like EVE Online, I literally could be flying in EVE Online for an hour or more and come across maybe 10 people total, and probably 9 of those were bots. Which one feels like the MMO at that point?
I agree.
Well, the problem is also distinguishing between feeling and what an actual design.
Exactly, I agree with that.
Because I can go sit in a corner, way out in the map where nobody else goes in an MMO, and if I see nobody, does it stop being an MMO? Not really. So when you say something like EVE, that you can fly for a long time without seeing anyone, that doesn't sort of take away from it being a MMO. It's an unfortunate aspect of the game that you can do that. And it's also an unfortunate aspect of all the instancing. This is something nerdSlayer and I talked about, that all the instancing does make it feel less like an MMO, but its intrinsic design is still a MMO in comparison to multiplayer, which it doesn't have a persistent world. So you constantly switch out people, and you constantly switch maps from times to times. There are multiplayer games who do have, who at least try to do a persistent world, but it's not exactly the same. There might be some crossover there.
I think that's an interesting example to drill down on. Let me ask you a question. If in EVE Online, never again did anyone choose to group up in more than 10 people, would it still be an MMO? If people just if it was possible, but no one ever did group up in a large enough group to make it feel massive.
Its design is.
I think it really does have to be multifaceted. Like Limposs and I spoke about just this week. Like we came up with this term, I think, on stream. The definition for MMORPG, like we talked about, there needs to be persistence, there needs to be a constant interactivity between people, and then there needs to be like a certain amount of players. I think if it's just players, then you don't take into consideration games like Rippy's actually just said in chat, which is RuneScape. Is anybody here going to say that RuneScape isn't an MMO? I don't think anybody would. And that game's pretty antisocial in some cases. Like, you can get by playing solo. Now, the difference in this and what we talked about before, Limpos, is that in RuneScape, you're still interacting, right, with your community. You're still interacting with the environment and the economy and things like that. So even though you're playing a solo player, you're still having that MMO feel. So it almost like makes an MMO possible, even if you don't have that many players in the same area exactly. So RuneScape kind of makes things complicating, I feel like.
Yeah, that does actually complicate the definition I gave for sure.
I wouldn't. Yes,
Go ahead.
please.
Go ahead.
RuneScape does complicate stuff because they actually have limiters in place that forces you to socialize. Basically, they have missions in which you can only finish if you have a group. You have, to a certain extent, limiters in which they say you have to make a group. And that's, I think, is missing from a lot of these theme park MMOs, which basically let you have everything solo. They don't force you to communicate with each other and basically looking for group or grouping up to beat this and that boss. So I don't think RuneScape does complicate stuff. It just the level cap is just much higher until you have to socialize with someone.
That might make the case, I think, for persistence, like some of you are saying, because in my mind, so what if RuneScape is an MMO, but you only have like 5 or so people interacting at any given time? I don't really know RuneScape, but then why wouldn't Diablo be an MMO, right? But I don't think it is. I don't think most people would call Diablo an MMO, even though you have lots of people interacting in a similar sort of way, from what I understand. But if you have a level
I didn't
of
know
persistence,
that choruses
transferring,
Yo, can you send me a message
there's
about
a
it?
sort of a broader
If you guys ever
world,
want me to check
so
out
to speak,
games, the
that
best way
you're
to
moving
contact me is
across
just
and
message me
interacting
or
with.
like
Maybe
email
that
me, and
is
then
the
just like give me some backstory as to why it's cool, why you like it, and then just like, oh, here you go, a link. You want to jump in, Limpos? I know you had something to say earlier.
I actually forgot.
it's okay.
Unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I think we obviously have had a lot of interesting discussion. It makes me wonder now what's the next step of this particular discussion, because I feel like we can keep it going, but maybe we need to get more specific. I think that's something we could look into. Say, for example, maybe we actually need to go to another topic that's somewhat related, if that makes sense, almost like a web, like we're covering a web. Like maybe we need to go and now analyze the idea of what's considered an MMO in regards to a theme park versus a sandbox game, because I feel like if we could nail down that, then maybe we'll have a better working definition of what's considered massive. And maybe eventually in the future, I'm going to throw this out there, I don't know if any of you guys disagree, I think we won't remember theme park games as really being massive that much. Like in the future, I think we'll look back at them and we'll see them as theme park games. I don't think we'll see them as massive multiplayer online games, but that's just my opinion, because I think in the future, the scale is going to be that much grander. So just naturally, when you look back, you're going to be like, oh, is that really an MMO back then? That kind of thing. I think the same thing that happens now in a way in the past, where people look back at certain games and say certain things about the market because of that, I think that's going to happen in the future as well.
Well, that's interesting. One thing that I thought about when it came to sandbox MMOs, and that was actually how high you want to go. Because if you go too high, you suddenly also end up with almost disassociation. It's like if you have this massive continent, like something we haven't even thought about in size before, and we fill it with, say, 100,000 people. Okay, well, at that point, you're going to end up playing, and you will end up playing, or you'll end up not meeting like 80,000 of those people. And sort of thinking about, well, how much that then sort of, if that's unreasonable to think of, or if...
I hate to bring it back to it, but I would say look back a couple of years, welcome to EVE, because that pretty much is what EVE was. And to a large degree, it still is. Like, there's a lot of people in that game you'll never really interact with, but you still suffer the consequences in some ways of their actions, which I think is a key part of your MMO in that aspect.
How many is EVE Online?
I mean, currently, like, it's about 25, 30k accounts online, but at the max, what I have seen is like 60 plus k accounts online at a given time. and that's of course a lot more where available, but we're not always locked in, of course.
Yeah.
So
this might,
yeah, go ahead.
So this might be a little bit of memey answer, but we currently talked about Minecraft, and the biggest Minecraft server, I think it's called Hightail, and has something like people, might be more, and it's basically a sandbox MMO, because you give the players all the tools they need to do whatever they want. People can make games in the world themselves. They can build structures. They can make, I don't know, arenas. They can hold their own tournaments and do whatever they want. Basically, is a good blueprint if you want to make a sandbox MMO. Give players all they need. Make a Mario Maker, basically, just online, and that would be a perfect sandbox MMO for me. Just scale it to, I don't know, 1,000 people a minimum, and then limit.
Hightail is gonna do that. Like, I'm telling you, Hightail is gonna have 1,000-person servers, just like they were capable in Minecraft with now much upgraded tech. People are gonna look at Hightail whenever that game comes out, and after it's been out for a little bit, so people have time to tinker with it. The community has time to tinker with it. People are gonna start to look at it like a serious MMO. I'm not kidding. I think it's gonna have MMO servers, and people are gonna really be taking it serious.
I think so as well.
I mean, the core of a good sandbox comes down to provide players a space and tools, and tell them have fun.
I actually think it's interesting that it seems to me that you brought up earlier, nerdSlayer, that you think that the future is grander. I look out at the horizon of games coming out, and I see, or MMOs. I see Camelot Unchained. I see Crowfall, and those, those aren't. They may be developed by people from the industry, but they're not published, not backed by the big AAA publishers. It seems like the future of larger scale is going more indie, and the traditional publishers, your World of Warcrafts, your Guild Wars, and etc. They seem to be focusing more on smaller kit scale content, from what I've seen.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think.
Well, that's all. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that that's actually related to something that I wanted to talk about some other time. So maybe you'll have to remind me. Can you message me that so maybe I can not forget about it, because I don't want to go too much into it today, but that's something that I have wanted to talk about.
What I wanted to say was that sort of going almost back in time, because as far as I know, a lot of those, a lot of the old MMO developers did sort of start out as indie companies. I think Blizzard is one of the few that sort of started out after having a couple of successful titles and then finally making an MMO. But a lot of MMOs, a lot of famous MMOs that came out were by really small developers who weren't backed by mega publishers. Not that there really were many big publishers back then.
I'm sorry, I'm derailing this a little bit, but so MMOs need a community for them to work.
We're finishing up. We got like 10 minutes or so don't worry. We can talk about whatever.
So MMOs need a community for them to work, and the reason why I think World of Warcraft worked so well is because there was a community behind it already. Then players just jumped on the bandwagon, the next big thing. So that's why it worked. And every consecutive MMO afterwards didn't have that community. It didn't really work. I think Eve had a similar thing, that people already wanted that type of game, and then there was a large community for it, and then it was an instant success when it came out. And I think around the 2010 failed because it was basically a product someone, but there was no community behind it, and that's why it didn't work. That's why all of them failed, basically. That's why I think what you mentioned, Hightail, is going to be the next big thing, at least in my opinion. It's because there's already a community behind it. There are already people that will play it instantly when it starts.
Casual audience guaranteed, and that's a big reason like most games fail, obviously, is a bit like actually let's go a little bit into what Ulysses said, since we do have a little bit of time here before we finish up the roundtable, which, by the way, fantastic one, our best one so far. Thanks everybody for showing up, and keep showing up in the future. If anybody else would like to get in, by all means, it's open, so you can join in. But I think it's this is actually related, what everybody's saying here, to the idea that Ulysses was kind of pointing out about how the indie market is pushing the scale, which is a bit strange to think about, while maybe the AAA market is sort of relying more on packaged content, developer made content, and theme park MMOs. I think actually that's because it's not sustainable. I don't think it's sustainable to make a theme park game as an indie developer. I'm not really convinced it's sustainable. I mean, show me an MMO that was ran by indie developers that's completely theme park that still has longevity. Like, there's barely none that exist. I feel like it's pretty hard to do that, because if you just look at just basically break it down to the dollars and cents.
I think that the only thing that sort of runs counter to the statement I made earlier, and this sort of concept, is that Blizzard, Activision Blizzard, I should say, changing the way phasing works for Classic, I actually think is the only example I can think of that's counter to this, where at least it may not work like this, but the stated way that they want phasing to work is more people over a larger phase. So what did they say? Like 3,000 people in a phase is what they wanted, and for their layering technology, this new technology, and that is a step towards scale, or at least desiring scale. Whether they accomplish that or not, that's the only example I can think of where a major
Yeah, I just say it's after doing so many different Death of a games on games that are considered to be what people describe as theme park. I think the main thing. Oh, looks like Discord's lagging again, but the main thing that I like to focus on in that respect is you look at the way that those companies make money and their content loop, essentially. Like, how do they have to keep making money? And you realize that the differences between Hytale and a game like WoW, even, like, let's just use WoW as an example. I mean, do we even need to talk about the difference in money required in order to make those two different games and keep making money with those two different games? Hytale, you can just make badass technology and boom, your game's going to sell like Minecraft. I'm not saying like as great, but I'm just saying it's going to sell like that. Like, it's going to sell like hotcakes because people just want a framework to be able to play around with. But how many people are going to be interested in the theme park experience when it no longer is satisfactory for them? So what I mean is like, after you start to reach the point to where you're no longer interested in playing that version of that kind of content, how are they going to keep making more content if they can't keep making more money by making that sort of content and bringing people in? And so you have this, no matter what, you're going to have some huge exodus of players with such a business model, in my personal opinion. And we've seen that with WoW already. Even the biggest sub-based MMO had a big, massive atrophy of players. If that can happen, it can happen to anybody. And so I don't know. That's my thoughts on it.
I think that there's also sort of what you're talking about with expenses being more expensive. Another thing I think it's understated, and I haven't done the research to back this up yet, but I would like to, is I would like to see what the labor expense is for these indie companies per employee versus, like, say, an Activision Blizzard. So Activision Blizzard is based out of, Irvine, California, these very expensive places to live that have grown as the company has grown, whereas you have a company like Camelot Unchained, which I believe is based out of the East Coast. I imagine that, the expense to what their labor demands, what their employees demand for wages is lower than would be to support a quality of life in California.
I know a little bit about that, and you have to be a little bit careful about with the whole thing. One, they take, of course, way smaller wages. They have a lot of work, but they have hours not paid hours. Basically, they work 70 hours per week, but then they have capital in the company itself. A lot of indie companies or startup companies. So it is cheaper, that the labor is cheaper, they still earn enough to live for themselves, and most of them come from, I don't know, Eastern countries or even European countries where the living conditions are good, but it's way cheaper. So you have to be a little bit careful. And Activision Blizzard is, of course, they live in the most the country, not country, but city in the world. They don't pay their workers enough for what they are, and they have too many people that don't do anything. Basically, bureau workers that just are there because they're there. They're always there. They have a lot of that is not needed, and that's why they have so much expenses for something that they wouldn't need to.
I mean, for a large company, you do need corporate overhead because you just need control over the company. That's inherent to it. But what also comes into play is with these indie companies, from personal experience talking to developers of multiple ones, and of course, primarily from my aspect, is talked a lot, of course, to Star Citizen people as well. And it's just like they also hire a lot of people that are just fresh into the industry. Like these are people without massive backgrounds. So they start, at the lower end of the salary scales. And also, actually where you base your company makes a big difference. Like there's a reason why CIG has most of its development staff in the UK, because it's the most beneficial, budget effective means of developing your game. But again, the main thing comes down, like Nusai says with Theme Park, is like you need so many more people to make a Theme Park game work and continuously work, because you need to keep developing that thing all the damn time, compared to a sandbox style game, which primarily comes down to your technology side and adding things here and there, but you don't. The amount of people that you need to add content is vastly smaller than what you need in a theme park game, which means a sandbox MMO can just survive on a much smaller budget and income. And hence, for a indie developing studio, making a theme park game is just not viable.
Did you want to go Lempos first? I saw that you asked earlier.
Okay, yeah, good. I'm sitting out waiting. The thing I thought about when it comes to sandbox games in general as well is that, as much as I agree that they certainly don't need as much development or as much content, or the constant content updates that theme park MMOs do, I would say in general they do still need content updates, because if you watch the most popular sandbox games out there, it's the ones who got a lot of updates in quick succession oftentimes, to sort of keep people interested. Granted, some of those, of course, were also because they were in early access, so anything that really was added to the game was a major update, so to say.
I think that's worth pointing out, because that's exactly my problem with the survival game genre. The survival game genre just feels like essentially sandbox developers were like, we don't want to do any developer content, so here's the tools and we're going to do none of that. And it's like, that can work like Minecraft, except Minecraft also has story mode, right? So they also did release, quote unquote developer made content in Minecraft. So what'd you say? TCP Games is like 250 staff.
Yeah, I mean, give or take. So it's like, yeah, you still need developer-made content in your sandbox, because you always need some fresh bits and pieces for people to, focus on and work on. Like one of the key things for EVE is like, they introduce new ships which need new resources, which need to be farmed. People need to set up production for them. People need to figure out new doctrines on how to use them, what are they effective against, and all of that stuff. That's of course stuff that keeps people interested, because if you don't develop anything, your game is going to get stale and people are going to get bored, whether it's a sandbox or not. You always need to keep incentivizing people in a way. But again, the amount of time, simple work hours needed, that's just the key difference. Like you don't need as much time to keep a sandbox crowd entertained as you would need for the theme park crowd.
Yeah, because it's like systems based play, right? Like Raf Koster talked about it in one of the articles. I think Ludens has linked before, but if you've never found or gone to Raf Koster's website, any of you guys who are curious about MMO stuff, he breaks things down to where essentially a level you'd never see anyone else, including me, because he has way more experience than I do. Anyway, like one thing he talked about is that you have to, in a sandbox game, you have to introduce new systems that have a certain level of depth to them. And if you don't do that, and you rely essentially too much on making it, again, just standard developer-made content, then, just in the same way, you're essentially running into the problem that a developer-focused game is going to run into, which is content drought. So it's like, no matter what, even in a sandbox game, yeah, you're still focusing, when there is new content, you're going to have content maybe that might be a quest line or something that's like contained, but it's also like you need to introduce new systems into the, because otherwise the game just gets stale after a while. Have we reached the end, or did you want to say something else, Carlo?
No. The stuff, the stuff you develop for a sandbox game are not storylines. It's basically tools. You make a drill, or you make a, I don't know, a bread maker, a microwave. That's what you develop for a sandbox MMO, and not, I don't know, the next big character that has a storyline in which you have to fulfill quests. In sandbox games, you don't develop storylines or new assets or something like that. Develop systems, tools that players can play with. It's between, I don't know, a WoW and Minecraft Hightail, because you have everything already, and what you're developing is new rules for a new rule set for something.
I think to some extent you can actually marry the two together, so that you might be implementing systems, but then also make some kind of gold that you need to go for with these new systems, if capable.
I think I would add that, like, you can't just purely add tools, because I do think a very important thing of a MMO is the world. It's the lore of the world itself. And I find myself in some of these games that are trying to be like a sandbox MMO. It's like, if the world is not interesting, it's not an interesting place to be in, then I don't really want to be there. You're not attracting the player to your world. You need to have at least some story to your game, regardless of what you're making. So if you're trying to introduce new mechanics into your game, new rules, new whatever, you need to put them into the lore and make them part of the lore of your game, because that makes it a lot more interesting for players. And it's that connection to the world that you're playing, and that's very important, and that should never be underestimated.
I think I agree with that. I think my ideal preference here isn't even necessarily a pure sandbox, or definitely not a pure theme park. It's more of there's a small theme park where it kind of shows you how to work the tools, and it gives you an interesting story, and it fleshes out the world and why you're there, and then it releases you out into the sandbox and says, okay, now take that and run with it.
I think two can run somewhat parallel as well. So there is parts of the game that are theme park, be it dungeons or raids or stuff like that. And then sometimes you can integrate that you need to use some of the systems from the sandbox, and other times it might not be so necessary.
I mean, that's generally like, I'm sorry, I keep bringing it up, but I'm playing it a lot lately. That's how Eve does it. It's like they literally introduce at some updates, they introduce a theme park style element. Like, oh, you got Triglavian stuff. First you go invade their space, now they're invading our space. You shoot them, you loot them. From that, oh, we get stuff, we can build stuff. Oh, we can use that stuff to blow up each other. And that's how it translates from the theme park side into the sandbox side. So the theme park is used to introduce the stuff and gives you the reason, the places to farm it, because if you need to farm anything, it needs to be interesting, so make it interesting. And then it goes into the farming creates your ability to make new tools. You use the new tools to blow each other up in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've said as much as we need to say about it, and I think that there's many more conversations to be had that can evolve or spawn from this conversation, because doesn't mean that just because we've said a lot that there's not more to say about the whole entire spectrum of really just, I think about the interesting layers that go into making an MMO. It's just like you have to think about, like we've said already, theme park games work, and because they work, we have to learn from them. And that's why I always bring up WoW. Is like it's funny because people will think that I'm the biggest WoW fan ever, when it's like I make an argument on nearly every time that game caused so many problems. Like, I'm not afraid to acknowledge that, but I'm also humble enough to acknowledge their success, right? And the amount of success that they've had is undeniable. And so you have to at least be willing to look at the theme park model seriously and wonder what it does right, what it does wrong. Obviously, I have my opinion about it, that ultimately I think it's kind of not the future. I think that's the other direction, because the one quote I'll leave you guys with today, which I just think is a funny one, and also thank you for stopping by and being a part of this MMO Roundtable on the MMO term and what massive means. But the joke that I guess that I wanted to say was when it comes to the population in WoW and like theme park games, when it works, obviously it works in a grand scale in a way that's like unimaginable. But it's kind of funny to think that we're going back almost in time to where we started in the beginning. We used to wonder, subscription models were the future, we thought. Maybe that was just always going to be the future. And now we've like reversed things. In 2019, we're wondering, are subscription MMOs going to work? Which is just, it's so funny to think about how young this industry is. And the joke that I wanted to leave you guys with is that I think oftentimes people overestimate how many developers know a lot about MMOs. And I'm going to say it now, and I know many of the nerds in chat will be happy to hear this, but don't sell yourself short. Like, give yourself a lot more credit, because you guys would be surprised how little a lot of these developers who work in the industry and work in creating MMOs themselves know little about MMOs. So it's just like, you have to think about that and how young the industry is. If you go into like JavaScript programming and you were to go into like the very entry level positions, everybody knows JavaScript, right? But MMOs and MMO design is an esoteric concept, right? It essentially means that you have to know history, you have to know social interactions, you have to know systems, you have to know the way that they interact together. And that's not an easy thing to know. You know, it's like a very strange thing. In fact, I feel like I know it because I'm strange, you know? Like, I don't know if it's typical to know or be interested in that weird combination of things. But I just wanted to leave everyone with like, hey, just because we're random MMO fans on a roundtable talking about things that we think, give yourself a lot more credit, because, hey, those people who are working on the MMOs that right now are the most popular MMOs probably had less experience than you did. Anyway, that was my funny joke to leave you guys with.
Oh, sorry. Were we supposed to laugh?
No, laughing is optional. Laughing is optional.
That was
more of me saying goodbye.
Goodbye.
Well, then say goodbye instead of just awkwardly ending the joke.
All right, well, goodbye then.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Sayonara.
I wonder if Osai is gonna go robot. Okay, he's not. Well, thanks for stopping by, Osai. It's okay, man. It's not your problem.
Yeah, so sorry for the issues, man. I hope I can fix them and actually participate more the next time.
Yeah, no, you brought up a good point. I wish we could have examined it more, but it's cool, man. Next time.
All right, see you.
See you later. Okay. Yeah, no, I brought that up though because it's a rhetoric that you see a lot. Like, people will say, "Oh, this developer, like, you don't know what they go through. They're so smart and intelligent and they know everything." And it's like, guys, if you've been playing MMOs for at least a decade, you kind of actually know a lot about MMOs. Like, give yourself some more credit. Trust your opinion more. Trust your gut more, right? Like, I'm not saying just don't peer review or don't, question things, and all of that just goes without saying. Question everything. But I just mean, like, when you look at the way how young the industry is, I'm just bringing it up to illustrate how young the industry is. That there's still developers who work in the space who don't even really know how MMOs work. So just, imagine in the future when we have like a cast of all-stars or something working on a game, or even just a cast of people who've like all had experience working on an MMO. Like, the future can look grand. I just think it's hard to see that right now because obviously all we see is all the shit that's right in front of our face, which frankly speaking, it's just kind of, it's not really shit in like the literal sense. It's more shit in just the same old, I think is the better way to describe it. I think calling it shit is obviously a little bit, I know. Act like every day is April 1st. There you go, MMO veteran. You'll be surprised how much you know and how much you start to notice after you've played it for so long and you've started to observe things. I just think that obviously MMO fans want to become MMO developers. It's kind of hard to do that, right? Wouldn't you say so? It's hard to become an MMO developer if you're an MMO fan because like there's not exactly a lot of games that are just hiring. And are they exactly, like, if you do work on a game, is it really going to end up panning out to anything? Because making an MMO in the first place is very, so it's a hard industry to break into. So I'm not trying to demean anybody who actually does know about things and really, you know, worked hard to get into the industry or wants to get into the industry. It's difficult to get into it. I'm just saying that maybe the people that are in it don't know as much as they think they do, because that's been proven over and over again, that maybe you shouldn't have such an idealistic expectation of what they can do. If you start working on an MMO, you'll never get the time to play them anymore. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Maybe that's why some people don't want to work on them. EverQuest was built by people who never made an MMO before. While I think that's true, there's an easy reason to see why, right? Because if you look at how they created the game, they based it off of what came before them, which was MUDs, right? And MUDs were based on what? Tabletop games. So the point is that the generation that comes after always has to examine the previous generation, see what they did, and essentially kind of learn from it and innovate. So sometimes, yeah, people will just create something. For example, when jazz was created in America, had people done jazz before? Not really, right? Like not like in the way that it's described in the definition, in the dictionary rather, as it's defined in the dictionary. Like jazz was created at some point. So like sometimes, yeah, there is innovations where people can just create something, but oftentimes they're basing it off of other things. It's not like they, like, put it this way. You guys ever heard that saying that nothing is really unique in the world? It sounds kind of like pessimistic, but more so what the saying is trying to say is that it's been thought of before. Somebody's thought about it before. So ideas aren't really unique. It's more so about who can actually accomplish the ideas or who can kind of like package it in the best way, right? It's not always about who's the best or who's the most innovative. So yeah, in the case of EverQuest, there was a lot of innovation there. And I think that you have to obviously recognize that. Obviously, people will look at WoW and be like, oh, is there that much innovation? There, of course, is innovation. But it's just, I see it more as like a streamlining of what EverQuest did. So they did take notes, essentially. And that's why they made a better product, which I think should be, obviously, acknowledged and noticed. It's crazy how popular EQ still is. They killed it with a progression service for the 20th anniversary, and Project 1999 is still pushing 1,800 in peak hours. Yeah, I mean, when I played on Project 1999, I'll be honest, I was pretty shocked that many people were still playing it. I was pretty shocked. But I saw why. I think the problem for me is that it's very hard for me to go back to old school MMOs and continue to play them going forward, because I'm a forward thinker. And that's just kind of how I am. I like to always think about what's coming in the future. And so I'll go back and play those games, but I can never just stay for a long period of time. And I think part of the problem is that for many of them, obviously, I've played them already. Like in the case of Star Wars Galaxies, I played it for a number of years. So how much more is there for me to experience? Not really a whole lot, right? Even in a sandbox game, because remember, you have to keep innovating. Otherwise, it is going to become kind of repetitive after a while. So I think that it is important, though, to go back and at least just try those private servers, try those different games, Project 1999, WGMU, and see what they're about, and be open-minded about it. Maybe even smoke some weed before, if that's legal where you're at. I'm just saying, like, be open-minded, have a drink. Don't try and be so judgmental, because the graphics are going to look old, all right? The gameplay is going to look old. That's just the unfortunate truth, right? Those games are going to look dated. But actually look at their systems, right? Look at the way that they communicate their game, and look at their vision. Like, what do you think is the vision for the game? And think about, does it still accomplish that in 2019? And you're gonna find oftentimes they still do, and that's pretty damn impressive. That means they made a fucking game that can hold up to the test of time, right? And that's why the rhetoric of it's just nostalgia is so annoying to me, because oftentimes it's just like, is nostalgia why people are still playing Star Wars Galaxy's emulator, like, still to this day? Like, when does it stop becoming nostalgia and start to become something rational? Say, for example, like maybe a good game, or maybe a good system, or maybe it's one of the only MMOs that actually exists in like the Star Wars realm, for example. One thing that always surprises me is how little influence a game like The Secret World had on the future of MMOs. The active passive skill system and horizontal leveling and character progression. I would love to see that in future games. I would agree. And I think that the problem there is that it had such a short run. When games have such short runs, I feel like that's kind of where my series comes into play. Is like, hopefully I can outline maybe what went wrong, but also show you what went right. Because like, I just did my video about Gotham City Imposters. And look, I'm going to be honest, the reasons that game failed are a little bit more obvious than others. But I also took the time to highlight maybe things that it did cool, right? Like things that were fun about it, things that were exciting about it. Because there are games like The Secret World, which unfortunately might be forgotten. Sorry. They might get forgotten. Because it's just one of those games that didn't necessarily have the longest run. And it had a bit of a confusing model. So I feel like that also affected a lot of it as well. But obviously, sometimes the most innovative games are not the ones that are going to last, because they're so risky in the way that they're innovative that they kind of fuck up on other things. Can we talk about farming at some point and how most MMOs do boring farming? Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are so many MMO systems currently involved that I just think are not just bad systems, but they might actually be harmful in some ways. I'm going to say some I think I just opinionated on, obviously, but others I think are just, it's hard to argue that they're not. In fact, I made that crappy joke at the end, but I remembered another thing that I wanted to add that I actually forgot in the middle of my little closing, my closing joke with the guys on the roundtable. It's that I realized something the other day. People were asking on one of my videos about, I don't know, something about, oh, like, this is just your opinion, this is just your opinion, like, it doesn't need to have these particular aspects to be considered an MMO. And I was like, you know what? You guys are right. Like, let me pull out the soapbox really quickly. The sandbox. Let me pull out my sandbox really quickly. Let's pull out the soapbox. You know what, guys? You're right. You're absolutely right. It doesn't need those MMO systems. It doesn't. You know what? It doesn't need to be a massive. It doesn't need to have multiplayer aspects. It doesn't need to have trade. It doesn't need to have an economy. It doesn't need to have battlegrounds or open, dungeons or open questing. It doesn't need to have really any of that. All these games really need is just the basis on the game itself, right? All the social element stuff doesn't really matter. So don't focus on the social stuff. Don't focus on the massive multiplayer stuff. Just ignore all of that. And then the critic in me is like, okay, that's one of my favorite things to do with the MMO genre. You want to know specifically what it is? It's taking an MMO and deconstructing the MMO aspect from it. So the massive aspect from it. And then just looking at it on the basis of it as a game. That's one of my favorite things to do, because oftentimes you'll see that some of these MMOs, without their MMO aspects, they're kind of shitty games. Has anybody else noticed that? You take away the MMO aspects from many MMOs, and I mean, they're kind of shitty games, right? They're not really good games. And what I'm trying to say is that that's the point. The social aspect is the point of the game. That's the point. If it wasn't the point, it would just be a shitty game. Think about that. In a game like SWTOR, let's say that they actually sold it instead of an MMO, but exactly how it is now, they sold it as a single player game. I don't really think many people would have that many problems with it, right? But it's the fact that it calls itself an MMO, it quacks like an MMO, it pretends to be an MMO, that people are kind of like, well, isn't it a shitty MMO then, by that logic? And that's exactly what I said in my SWTOR video. Do I think SWTOR is a bad game? I actually don't. Do I think it's a bad MMO? Yes. I think it's a very bad MMO. And so it's like, my point is don't be so quick to divorce the idea of the social aspect from an MMO just because you want to prove an argument or something. Because remember, it's kind of the point, right? At the end of the day, an MMO without the social aspects has shitty combat, has latency lag issues, has poor story content in comparison to single-player games, has worse fidelity and graphics compared to single-player games, has worse combat and just like overall interactivity with like engines and physics and things like that than most single-player games. Do I need to keep going on and on? Obviously, I'm doing this to make a point that if you divorce the social aspects, you kind of have a bad game. So you can't just divorce the social aspects. You need to keep making it part of the game because that's the point of the MMO genre. I don't know why I need to keep saying that part, but the point of the MMO genre, right? Massive multiplayer online. It was always about social interaction. That was always the reason for the industry to start and why it took off in the way that it did. However, people are so quick to divorce that aspect from those games because they essentially don't want to have to rate them objectively. Like if we look at Black Desert Online as an MMO in terms of what is considered an MMO, what makes you want to interact with people, what creates a community, it's not that bad at it, actually. It's not, I'm not going to say it's great. It's not horrible, right? So it's like, but the fact that people in Black Desert Online, when they, defend the game, they essentially want to completely get rid of that aspect. They want to be like, nah, who cares about the MMO? Like, it's like, guys, then you have a bad game. Then your game is not that good. That was my argument with Black Desert Online, was if you compare it on the basis of its game, other action games, it's not that good. That was my argument. That was my rant. Don't divorce the social aspects because then we just have shitty games, guys. Like, is somebody going to make an argument that if SWTOR would have focused on its story content more so than the multiplayer aspects, it would have been a better game? Is anybody going to make that argument? I feel like a lot of people would make that argument. I would make that argument. That it would have been a better story-based game, a better RPG, if it didn't have all that other essentially useless stuff added to it. I think it would have been a better story game. Just as I think that if they didn't focus so much on story and making everything instanced, it would have been a better MMO. So it's like you have to choose which way you want to have it. If you're going to be an MMO and exist in the MMO industry, you're going to be judged based off of your MMO mechanics, right? Your social mechanics. You're going to be judged off of that shit. Your community aspects. You're going to be judged off of that. You're going to be judged off of how much do you make your community interact with each other and make it a core part of your game. You're going to be judged on that. I'm tired of people saying, oh, don't judge it based on the MMO stuff. It's like, okay, then what do you want me to judge it on? On the basis of being an action game? Black Desert Online, I'm sorry, but compared to other action games, is it better than God of War? I wouldn't make that argument, right? In any way, shape, or form. In fact, I don't even see how you could make the argument. If you just do it on the basis of their gameplay. It's like an impossible argument to make. Like Desert Online would be great if the upgrade system and cash shop worked differently. Yeah. Good luck with that though, right? The cash shop at this point. Something that is living, that constantly takes place and has you losing stuff will keep you in a... Absolutely. There has to be scarcity. Scarcity is like a primary defining factor of a video game, right? Oftentimes. So I'm going to rapid fire a couple MMO topics since we haven't gone through our MMO on the go segment and we're almost running out of time here. So if you would like to ask me any questions, go ahead and get those in now. You can at me in chat, Twitch chat rather, and then join Discord. I don't really think we have any time. Sorry for a podcast. Sorry for a call-in on Discord because we had a long roundtable. But you can at me with any of your questions in chat, so I'll get to those. But let's rapid fire through a couple of these things here. I saw an interesting topic brought up about Guild Wars 2. And Scarlet Eyes, asks the question of, does anyone else think that Guild Wars 2 world has no soul at all? All characters have no character? Now, I want to say first off, I don't necessarily agree with that statement, but it made me start to kind of evaluate something here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about an esoteric idea here concerning Guild Wars 2. So, in this idea, I was wondering, why would somebody think that Guild Wars 2's characters don't really have a whole lot of personality? And I started to actually figure that out. And I wonder if you guys agree or see my perspective here. It's because your character doesn't have a personality. Think about it. You're just kind of like in the story. And since the characters don't really need to have that much personality because the main villains are big dragons, or the main bosses are big dragons and big monsters, you don't really need to have a nuanced discussion about who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. That was a constant discussion in Guild Wars 1, in my opinion. Now, Guild Wars 2, does have memorable characters. In fact, it has characters that I feel like people in chat probably could remember right now. The point that I wanted to make about Guild Wars 2 actually is more specifically about your character himself has no personality. So is it really the game's fault that the characters don't have personality if your character has no personality? What I'm trying to say is that if the game treated you differently based on what you played and who you played and how you played as, then maybe the personality actually would matter more, right? Maybe you would have more personality, and then maybe the characters by nature would then have more personality as well. I think it's more so a matter of, I don't know if it's because writers at Guild Wars 2 are bad, they don't know how to write characters, or characters are just uninteresting. I think it's because there's barely any consequence in the game, and you can't really, change the way that you interact with the world in a lot of cases. It kind of is just like, it feels vapid because it is vapid. So I don't know if you can blame Guild Wars 2, I'll say, to address this post. I don't know if you can blame Guild Wars 2, and I don't necessarily think it's the most egregious in that. I just think that it also needs to be pointed out that because your character doesn't have a whole lot of personality itself, it's kind of easy to see the characters as not having a lot of personality themselves too. So the same thing, by the way, I think applies to Final Fantasy XIV. It's hard to feel emotionally involved when you feel like there's not a whole lot of consequence in your character and the story of your character. But I honestly, I find that of Chosen One Chosen One storylines, period. If the game isn't difficult enough, then you're kind of just going to feel like you're always chosen to win, I guess, if that makes sense. But I won't go too much into that, because that was just some rant that I saw that it made, sometimes I joke about the MMORPG subreddit and also just MMO fans in general. But sometimes they can really make you question things. And while I don't necessarily agree with its premise, it did make me question, like, why does that game not necessarily feel so, like, living? And I think it probably has to do with what I pointed out. At least that's my opinion. They tried to do that at the beginning with the 3 different choices, but that was great. Yeah, that's weird, as I remember there being a choice in your storyline early in the game. But I don't know if maybe things have changed since then. Maybe everything's now just big raids or something. Fractals or whatever they call them. I haven't been following the game, the story in the game, I should say. The chapters. I haven't followed any of those. Yeah, I'll link the Reddit. How would you write personality into an MMO? Man, it's a bit hard, but to write personality into an MMO, you have to be essentially treated like you have personality. Like, your character needs to be treated in some way, like there's some level of, you could differ in opinion, in my opinion. That's kind of how I see it. That's one way to look at it. But another way to look at it is, you just have to create very complex characters. Sorry, not complex characters, but very long repeating storylines to where you have constant exposure to characters. I think WoW is a perfect example of that. The concept art, but also just like characters like Thrall, right? You have characters like Sylvanas as well, which get constantly brought up and constantly shown in lore and stuff like that. And so they've had the advantage of going into an MMO, of already having a backstory, right? You already have these Warcraft games that the game is kind of based on. I think it had an unfair advantage in that case. But you could also, as somebody just pointed out now, like Jazz Perret said, you could leave personality to just player-player interactions. But I think that there has to be some level of both. I think NPCs need to have some level of character, just as factions and NPC factions need to have some level of character, so they're different and unique, right? And so consequence exists. Maybe you have blood trolls who don't get along with other trolls, but so they're their own separate faction, but they're still trolls. So there's still that level of conflict or maybe shared experience there, even though they're a different evil faction. I think there's room for both. I think you can make it about player interactions and player personality, but you can also leave the choice and ability to have personality with regards to how you interact with your story. I just, again, if you make it too linear, it's very hard to introduce personality. That's just my opinion. If your game is very, very linear, the only way you can introduce personality is by essentially forcing it. Like, you have to like create it yourself. So a developer, if their game doesn't have its own means of allowing you to have your own personality, for example, different ways to play classes, customization, different roles, like different things like that, right? If it doesn't have those sorts of things, after a while, it's going to start to feel a little bit constraining. And so you are reliant on the developers themselves to introduce more of that story and personality and make you care about characters. And that's why they did the whole recent thing with BFA, obviously. They're trying to make big moves and make people care about the characters. The problem is that the world itself doesn't really care. So it's hard to make players care about the characters when the world itself doesn't seem to care about them. In WoW and ESO, I have found that there are no choices and consequences, only fake ones. And I would largely agree with that. I would largely agree with that. I don't know how hard it would be, but you could have dialogue choices that determine your player personality. And I mean, you could also choose your own alignment, and maybe actions that you do affect your alignment in some kind of way. Like these are aspects that have been explored in different games. The problem I often find with alignment systems is that oftentimes they're kind of like a zero sum. Either you're evil or you're good. And so therefore it's like either you just steal everybody's shit or you don't steal everybody's shit. And I feel like there needs to be a lot more nuance. There needs to be a lot more roles that flirt with that nuance. Say, for example, I love bringing up Galaxies, but Galaxies did a great job of having roles that also have professions attached to them, but specifically have morality attached to them. Interesting morality questions. For example, if you're a smuggler and you're playing Star Wars Galaxies, are you a good character? Not really. I mean, you're selling spice. That's a drug. And it's not weed, it's like a hard drug, right? That gets you addicted to it. So it's like you're selling something that's like maybe kind of morally questionable. And that should be part of your character and your character's personality. So I think you have to offer a broader spectrum of morality as well if you want to have different personalities. But again, when games try to do alignment systems, it always ends up coming back to the same idea. Either you're red and you're dead, or you're blue and you're a good guy. And it's like there has to be more ways in which you could affect alignment, or at least affect your personality with regards to the game. And what I mean by that is like literally just like the mathematical values that you have for factions and characters and things like that. That's other ways that could affect your personality, of course. They're a little bit more like ham-fisted, I guess is that word, right? They're more technical reasons and maybe less kind of open-ended like reasons that other people have brought up in chat. We're going to be ending the podcast soon, by the way, so I'm going to go ahead and try and get through a couple more things. I'm going to rant a little bit about Star Wars: The Old Republic. We've been talking about it a little. Well, I'll go into their recent news that there's been some changes coming to free-to-play and preferred changes. So free-to-play players that have not... So I don't need to go into that. Essentially, they increased the credit cap. And the credit cap does affect players because before, when you were a free-to-play player, you had a cap of 200,000 credits. And then if you were a preferred character, which is somebody who's ever subscribed once or spent money, period, then you had access to the 350,000 credit limit. They've raised that up apparently to 1 million. They've added an extra quick bar and medical pros. And so this became news. And you might be wondering, why am I even talking about it? Why is this even news? And frankly speaking, I don't know why it is either. So like I'm wondering just as much as you guys, why is this news? Why are people talking about this? Why was this even posted on the subreddit on mmorpg.com? Why does this have multiple upvotes? I'm kind of confused myself. I actually was hoping maybe one of you guys knew. Why is this a big deal? Because if the argument is that, oh, these changes were needed, guys, I'm going to tell you a funny meme, okay? When somebody reaches their hand into your wallet and steals your wallet, but then has enough kindness to give your wallet back, but with a little bit less money, do you say, thank you for your kindness, sir? I appreciate that. You were so nice. That was so nice. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to give me like my wallet back, man. That was nice of you. It's like, but they took your wallet in the first place. So like, I'm confused here because BioWare introduced this idea in the first place as a means of making more money and taking advantage essentially of the idea of the concept of free-to-play, preferred players, and subscription. This is based on the Asian model, which has existed for many, many, many years. My point is that they did it before completely to take advantage of the fact that it makes more money. Can you make any other argument otherwise? Why else did they have it in the first place? Essentially, all it is now is just like Card said. They know it's good PR. So that's why they put it out. They put it out because they know it makes people think about their game. And, oh, maybe I'll come back because they did a good thing. They did a nice thing. They did it in the first place, though. So like, I'm not trying to say you can't forgive people for having a change of heart or something, or you can't change. But I'm just saying, don't be so quick to like celebrate their changes here when, remember, they're the one that introduced this business model in the first place. So I don't know if I would have been jumping up for joy. Like, read some of the comments here, guys. Like, some of them are actually pretty funny. But the comments on this thread itself, this is the post, by the way, and I'll link it in chat just in case. I like to make it a good habit to link the articles that I go over. So you guys know I'm not trying to just like misrepresent it. So this guy jokes about how they're adding a third action bar. Okay, there's a lot of trolls on this subreddit. I'm not trying to say take this subreddit completely serious, okay? But what you will see here is like too little, too late. I mean, that's I'm surprised to see kind of things like that. But you see people say stuff like that. The crit cap is a bigger change than people really think. Like, it's such a big deal. Like, oh my god, it's such a huge deal. No, it isn't. I was never giving a shit about the credit cap whenever I was playing the game. What I was caring about was the fact that I couldn't do PvP. Was the fact that I couldn't do raids unless I subbed. Was the fact that I had to do all the fucking shitty bullshit quests that aren't the main storyline or aren't the world quests. That was the stuff that I was annoyed about. I don't think anybody is really focusing first and foremost on how much money you were capped at. That's just another one of the things that they happen to change as a means of essentially affecting how much money you spent on the game. But it's just, it's strange. It's just like, I mean, this guy actually kind of responds to it. He's like, anyone who was a fanboy, no. He was talking about a previous point. This guy was saying, I'm talking about fanboys justifying it to everyone else. This is exactly what I'm trying to get into. Is that why is it that fans are justifying these changes as good to other people when they introduced it in the first place themselves? Like, the developers themselves introduced it. You shouldn't be defending them. You should be saying, yeah, that's what you should do. That's what you should do. You did what you should do. Congrats. All right, the last thing that I'll get to is there was a interview that Mark Jacobs did on the state of Camelot Unchained. And there's a couple interesting things here in this regard. MK Ultra was success. Oh, please don't say that, man. Don't say that. Don't depress me even more. Camelot Unchained's Mark Jacobs on the state of beta and the NDA. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but if you'd like to go through it, feel free. But he did say some news regards to how long beta is going to go on. So they asked, excuse me, how much longer do you think this leg of beta will go on? You're planning more betas, right? But not early access shenanigans. After we missed our last date, I said we're just going to stop talking about dates until we can be sure we can hit them. I can say that the plan is beta 1 is supposed to be the longest of the 3 beta stages, with beta 3 intended to be the shortest. In terms of early access shenanigans, nope, none planned as now. We have 2 more beta stages planned. This is just the first one. As you know, I did the same thing in terms of beta stages for Dark Age of Camelot. So for those who haven't been following, beta stage 3 is obviously supposed to be the most complete stage of the game. It's the stage that I recommend that everyone tries the game at, because beta 2 might have some of the core aspects, but it's not going to be as feature complete as beta 3 will be. But I do think it's supposed to be largely feature complete, but beta 3 is considered the feature complete one. When will the NDA come down, they asked. Do you think that keeping the NDA up for so long compared to other indie MMOs in similar stages of production has caused PR problems for the game? Ooh, interesting. Good question. Massively OP. Some games don't mind streaming their games early because they use them for great commercial engines. Oh, they use great commercial engines, such as Unreal. In our case, we're building our own engine. Our early days were pretty rough. It's much harder as expected when you are building almost everything from scratch. In terms of whether it has caused PR issues, no, not in the big picture. Are some people pissed? Yep, I'm sure they are. I understand that and respect it. But we've been really clear about how we're going to do things, including the NDA. So nobody should be surprised that I'm sticking with what we said we were going to do. All right, now the interesting part. A year and a half ago, you told us that a 2019 commercial launch was very likely, but it doesn't seem so right now. What's your best prediction for the launch window right now? And what about Cube's public launch? What about dropping some planned features to get out the door faster? Is that on the table at all? Mark Jacobs said, it's still possible, but we're still short the engineers I hoped to get to make that happen. We just added a new engineer this week, but we need a few more if we're going to have a shot at 2019. As I've been saying in our updates, if and when we make the determination that we can't make 2019, we'll let our investors and our backers know. All right, well, there you go, guys. That's about the most information I found in regards to the beta date and also the NDA. So it looks like Mark Jacobs is keeping the cards close to his chest. They want to make sure the game is close to completion as possible before they let the press come see it, before they advertise it. They wanted to make sure their engine, of course, is squared away since they're using their own proprietary engine. And it looks like 2019, while still in the books, possibly, is looking more and more less uncommon. I think it's looking more and more like a 2020, possibly early launch, maybe Q1, Q2. But obviously, this is just based on the current timeline. We'll have to see how fast they can get that beta 3 build ready. So I'm eager to see the progress. And also, I'm glad to see that there's been some good questions asked and concerning the project. And also to point out what somebody said in chat, Tasty Graph, I don't think it's fair to blame Mark Jacobs on Warhammer Online, because if you look at the entire story, and I did a video on it, so go watch that if you want to, you'll find that there are a lot of things that were stacked against him. So, and he admitted that himself. And I think essentially because the evidence backs up his recollection of the events, what he said happened, I'm inclined to believe him. So it's like, unless the evidence can show otherwise, that he just led them astray and completely changed his vision for what the game, that what game he wanted to create. Unless I can find evidence that he did that, I think it's pretty much at this point safe to say that he didn't have a whole lot of say in why Warhammer became the way it became. I think it's a bad idea to launch an MMO near the class. Honestly, that has to be acknowledged here. Does anybody think that any of the classic MMOs, the Kickstarter MMOs that wanted to launch maybe sometime this year, next year, are going to be a little bit more afraid now that Classic WoW is launching and is doing quite well? I'm curious. All right, some questions I'm going to get through. And by the way, guys, I don't have a lot of time here, so I'm going to do these questions in about 10 minutes. I'm going to set a hard time of 10 minutes, so Card, hold me accountable for 10 minutes. All right, so get your last questions in. If you have any of them, I'm going to go ahead and go through some of the questions that I missed already. All right, so Volpel Anvil asked, MechWarrior Online announced a few weeks ago that it is now in an unofficial maintenance mode. Will there likely be a death of it? Ooh. Thank you. Thanks, Vorpal. Because I had been seriously thinking about doing a MechWarrior Online video, but I decided to do the Hawken one because obviously Hawken had actually been shut down on a couple of platforms. And people had suggested maybe I should look into MechWarrior as well because they're saying it's not doing as well as I thought it was. And I mean, that seems like confirmation for that. So yeah, the answer is yes to that. And I would actually look for it to be more sooner than later. The next question comes from, let's see, Ginger Spice. Or Ginger Spice or Die. Hey, what's up, by the way? What class are you playing in Classic? Probably already said, but I missed it. Man, you unintentionally triggered my trap card. And what I mean by that is that I wanted to play a Hunter, and now all of a sudden I'm seeing more and more issues with pet AI in Classic Beta, and I'm a little bit worried. I was a little bit smug a couple days ago. I thought this was the usual craze of MMO fans being unreasonable and just complaining because their class isn't flavor of the month anymore. And then I watched a dungeon run, and I'm going to show you guys the dungeon run that I watched, and maybe you'll start to see why I'm kind of having this opinion. Again, I'm not trying to feed into that fear rhetoric that people keep throwing out there, which is just like, oh, hunters are completely, utterly bugged, and so they're screwed, and, like, I'm not trying to feed into that rhetoric. But when I watched this guy do... Sorry, this isn't the video I was looking for. Let me find the one that I'm looking for. This is actually a video that I wanted to watch and did watch, but it's not the one in particular that I was looking for. I was actually specifically looking for a video where a guy does a bunch of solo dungeon pulls by himself in current Classic Beta. So what I noticed from watching this guy do this, obviously any player who's capable of doing solo dungeon pulls as a hunter is at least somewhat competent of a player. Wouldn't you guys agree? If you're able to do solo dungeon runs in Classic WoW as a hunter, you're at least somewhat competent as a player. I would argue that. I'm trying to find the exact footage itself, but I was watching this guy play, and the crazy thing was that his pet at random times would just like not really listen to him. And it was so strange to see because I've played Classic WoW now for about a month or two on the private servers. And guys, my pet is crispy. No problems at all. In fact, I'll show you an example of it. 1 second. I'll show you an example right now. Because I like to show you guys examples because it's one thing to say something, but I've noticed, just as in the case of my Black Desert Online video, my biggest regret is not showing you guys. Because I feel like if I can show you guys my examples in some cases, you'll see my argument a lot more. 1 second, let me affect this let me change this realm list really quickly. Because I currently was playing on a max level 60 server instead of the typical Lights Hope or Northdale server that I typically play on in WoW. So let me change my realm list really quickly. Yes, I know, everyone's probably laughing in chat. You've changed your realm list before if you played a WoW private server. Okay, this will take no time at all. I can show you guys this exact concept that I wanted to show. Oops. I look so angry there, typing in all caps. Okay, so currently right now, if I log on to a private server, which is Northdale, one of the best private servers currently in existence, probably the best server, I can hop on my hunter, and you'll watch the fluidity at which I can control my pet. Check this out. Okay, so watch. I'm going to send my pet to go attack that guy. That reminds me, by the way. I don't have my macros on this character. I'm going to have to log on to my other character. I don't have all my macros on this character. So when I went to go send my player, my pet to attack, he didn't even have the command mapped. So hold up. Let me get on my other character. If you're wondering why I don't have it on this character, it's because this is my alliance character and I'm a horde player. So, all right, here we go. Okay, I have my actual macros set up here. All right, so let's say I want to get my pet to attack this guy. Boom, he attacks. Hey, wait, come back. Ooh, look at the quickness that he comes back to me. All right, go attack him. Ah, come back. All right, go attack him. I'm gonna let him get close. Look, I'm gonna let him get close. He's real close. He's close. Nope. Nope. Yep. Nope. Nope. Look at that. Look at how fast and crispy my pet responds to my commands. Currently on WoW Beta, the classic beta, that's not the case. That does have me a little bit worried about my decision to play Hunter because I already hate pet AI, okay? I hate it. I've always hated pet AI. I played a bounty hunter in Star Wars Galaxies who used a pet, okay? I was a BM bounty hunter. Trust me, I hate pet AI, usually. But when I played the private server, I was like, man, this pet AI feels pretty crispy. It doesn't feel that bad. I like this. And then I saw some dungeon gameplay, which I'm trying to track down right now, which is kind of why I'm wasting everybody's time here so I can remember where it is. Okay, I found it. I'm good at bullshitting a little bit to save some time. All right, so here's this guy doing a solo pull of a dungeon by himself. And so obviously, if you've ever seen someone do this before, it's a lot of them jumping up on the environment, kind of utilizing things. But what I noticed is, like, watch the pet here. Watch how the pet moves here. I'm going to have to slow it down because this guy has it sped up, obviously. All right, so watch the pet here. Watch how unresponsive the pet is. He sent the pet... All right, right now, he had already sent the pet to attack. But the pet first doesn't get triggered at all, of course. He has him on defensive, and he hasn't sent the pet to attack. Okay, fair. Sorry, he doesn't have a macro like me. Usually, whenever I use the Hunter's Mark, I always have my pet attack macroed. He didn't have his macroed. So instead, he's gonna, I'm assuming, wait until he pulls him to a certain level. But here's where I started to notice problems with the pet. Watch this. Watch this. Watch the pet here. I know you guys are like, how the hell do you even notice this shit? I watch the most random shit late at night as I'm writing scripts, and maybe I'm potentially under the influence. But watch the pet here. He hasn't sent the pet to attack yet. But the pet randomly pulls into the direction to go start fighting this guy. And then watch this. Watch. Watch what he's going to do. And it's going in slow motion, by the way. He sends... He sends the pet away. Watch this. Let me slow it. All right, let me speed it up. Okay, so the pet is chasing the target. And then the pet just randomly switches to another target right there. Randomly. He didn't even tell him to attack that target. And then now he switches. It's like you're watching the pet AI, and the pet AI almost looks confused. He keeps look at down here at the command, guys. You see it going red over and over again, where it says L1 at the pet bar. I'm sorry if you guys can see here. It's kind of small, but it's the pet attack. Watch him continuously keep telling the pet to attack, and it's not attacking the target he was telling it to attack. Look at that. It started attacking it after, but he spammed it multiple times. He had to keep spamming it to attack that pet. So anyway, I noticed that when watching it, and it confirms the bugs that people have already been bringing up in Classic WoW, which is that there is a list right now that's actually surprisingly long that describes exactly the bugs that exist in the game with regards to the Hunter. So I don't know why the Hunter in particular is so damn buggy in Classic WoW. And yes, this is a long-winded way of me saying, I don't know if the Hunter is the class that I want to play. So I'm not trying to get anybody afraid of playing Hunter. If you don't have a problem with dealing with pet AI and it being difficult, by all means, go do that. but I actually do care about the pet AI, and I hate when pet AI is horrible. And classic servers right now, on the private servers, pet AI is just crispy. You saw that. I showed it to you. On the live servers, not so much. So I don't know if I'm going to play a hunter. All right, any last questions? We've got 2 more minutes before I leave. Artifact Gamer asked, do you think it's worth trying Dark Ages of Camelot in 2019? I do, but only because there's still a PvP server in existence that operates under a classic mentality. There's plenty of community players to join up with, and clans, and tons of warfare constantly going on. So like Dark Age of Camelot is one of those games, just like with Warhammer on their Return of Reckoning private servers. You can go back and still play. Like PvP games, historically speaking, you can kind of go back and still enjoy them, I would say, because they offer something that just frankly isn't really offered right now. And if you think that Guild Wars 2 and ESO have cool PvP systems, go try Dark Age of Camelot out and just check its systems out. You'll be surprised. Very surprised. Is that bar in the middle a Hunter auto shot timer add-on? Yes, it is. Fixed. That is. I prefer WoW Ascension myself. Having a blast there. I would love WoW Ascension to be a thing. I just, however, think it's unfortunately always going to be niche, which is why essentially I will never play it. I'm just not really interested in extremely niche games that aren't going to have a large audience and at any moment could just be shut down. Like, it's just, it sucks because Ascension on paper, I would love that version of WoW because it's full loot. I love full loot PvP. But that being said, I don't really think it's just fits that model. I would rather have a third faction in WoW than make it full loot PvP, personally speaking. And I'm sure probably most WoW fans would agree, right? All right, I think we've reached the end of the podcast. I want to thank everybody for stopping by today. We've ranted about enough topics. We've talked about enough MMOs, and I've probably bored enough people and also excited enough people. So maybe it's the end of the podcast. Finally, we've reached the end. I can say goodbye. No, but I want to thank everybody, as I said, for stopping by. We had tons of good discussion on the MMO Roundtable. Talked about really just a lot of interesting topics that I hope that we can get into more so. And I hope you guys will enjoy whatever the next roundtable topic is going to be, because I think I have an idea. Garthener brought up a good point. Maybe we should wonder, or at least examine, what's considered a good system in a sandbox game. I think if we could look at what a good system is, maybe we'd have a better understanding of how to go about introducing such things, obviously, in the future. So, like I said, thanks for watching as always, or listening on SoundCloud, wherever you decided to digest this content. I'm thankful. And I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast. Gotham City Imposters should be coming out either this week or the next week. That's the next death of a game. The game following that one is going to be a pretty juicy and interesting one, so I can't wait for that. And then also look for it on maybe Friday or Saturday. I'm trying to get some more casual streams in, as I said, of me maybe playing some Mafia, maybe playing some WoW, or just some random MMO. Whatever I end up doing. But that's because I'm gearing up for getting closer to WoW Classic launch. I plan on streaming that at EU times, which is mostly going to be kind of like lunch times or maybe earlier afternoon. Nothing more to say though, guys. Goodbye and thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it as always. Peace.